Department directors, do you want me to begin with judge introductions now or wait till our last senator gets here?
Who are you waiting on?
Senator Perez.
We have a lot of judges. Just start now. It's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to start with judge introductions. I actually don't have a list of my judges in front of me. So if any of my judges wants to just start and introduce themselves.
Okay, hold on. I'll pull up a judge list.
Yeah, I have the judge list.
Could someone also send me the judge list?
Can you come to me last?
Sure. I guess I'll start. I'll be your parliamentarian today. My name is Kumar, and I competed for the last 4 years at Thomas Jefferson High School. Now I'm making the switch to judging. If you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, my paradigm is on the document that everyone was sent. So yeah, looking forward to a good round today.
Mr. Murgida.
Alrighty, I'm up. So hi everyone. I polyed semis just recently. I've also judged a bunch of you guys about this tournament. I'm gonna do a very brief paradigm, not what my 5-page paradigm is, but something completely different. I want you guys to do good debate. What I mean by that is, if there's 4 negs in a row, that's not good debate. I want an AF followed by a neg followed by an AF. Play your role in the room, as I always tell you guys, and do what you're supposed to do. Debate, refutations, crystallizations. Those are the best kind of speeches when you give a late round, not a constructive.
Just to add to that, for the issue of speeches in a row, I'm going to be adopting the rules used at TOC this year. We cannot have more than 2 speeches in a row on the same side, which means if we have an AF, no neg, and an AF again, then nobody stands up for the next negation speech. It's an automatic call of the question. We move on to the next topic.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Kubba, can you give us a brief paradigm and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Sama Kubba. I will be one of the judges for this session today. Did you want me to just talk about what I'm looking for and a little bit about my background? Josie?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm an incoming freshman at Harvard for this fall, and I'll be debating for Harvard all 4 years. I did congressional debate for all 4 years of high school. Some of you guys already know about my debating history. I'm kind of been all over the place. I've debated with a lot of you guys before. I guess I'll be pretty straightforward about how I am grading this. And as soon as I actually, in terms of the ballot, there's different things they ask us for. I want some organization. And what I mean by that, if you could just give me a line or two at the very beginning, kind of outlining your argument, your speech, it really helps me out to be able to follow your speech a lot better. Another thing that I am looking for is with referencing your sources. You definitely, and I said this yesterday, but I really want to see you not only just say, according to CNN in 2017, I want to hear you reference an author and their credibility. What about them gives them the legitimacy to be able to support your argument? So journalist, senior editor, etc. Some sort of something like that. I have been docking when it comes to sources, but at the same time, I have been also balancing that out with logic. If you can explain your point very clearly, that I've been trying to put a balance between the two. In terms of delivery, I think the biggest thing that I will say that I really want to see an improvement on today is just more of, pace yourself a little bit with your speech. I think that you don't need to be aggressive the entire time. Because when you try to be passionate at some points, it just gets completely diluted because you've been so intense the entire speech that those moments that actually need that intensity don't really shine through as much. So definitely be selective in your tone, your emphasis, what exactly you really want the speaker to get out of it. Like I said, since I've been doing Congress a pretty long time, I've been all over. I really appreciate it when people are able to incorporate good public speaking skills and not just the argument part. So, if anyone has any questions about that, let me know.
Thank you. And for the rest of the judges, we don't have that much time, and your full paradigms are already on the doc, so let's try and keep these brief. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Are you waiting for one of us to go?
Mr. Manohar is next. I sent a list with all the
okay.
judges in order, so y'all can do
I
this.
thought Jonathan was ahead of me. Okay, if it's me then. Hi, I'm Nishad Manohar. I was the other parliamentarian in semifinals, and I was a judge in prelims. So I've judged a lot of you, and I've parlayed half of you. You all probably know the paradigm as well. I agree with a lot of the previous statements. Clash, ref, a lot. One thing that's been lacking in this tournament a lot is like really late round speeches. So I want to see that in this final round. Also, congratulations on making it here. It wasn't the easiest. I hope you all do very well.
I don't know where this list is, by the way. Just
Mr. Reaser, it's in the chat. Mr. Onteeru's next.
Hey everyone, I'm Manu. I'm actually a clean judge. I haven't been on the panel for prelims or semis, so this is my first time. I didn't upload my paradigm to the doc, but I've debated with a lot of you. I'm very, very adept on the national circuit. So again, all types of speeches and presiding is valued. I could care less about when you speak. Your content is really all that matters. I could also care less about your delivery. If you're not saying anything of substance, you're not moving the debate forward. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Basically, all of you know me because I parlayed prelims and judged semis. Everyone knows, don't be like Chamber D. Sorry if you were in Chamber D. That was the worst 5 hours of my life. Basically, just...
What happened? Are you okay? Like...
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. But basically, use clash, refute, please, Crystal. If you're speaking late, actually don't give a constructive, please. Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for enacting the no two on the same side rule. Basically, just have fun, be passionate. That's all that matters. Make sure your content's good. Don't rehash. Just make this a good debate.
Sorry, I might have to step in before the next person goes. There are 27 people in this call, meaning that someone who's not in the finals round is in the finals round.
I think they're spectators. That's why. There's
a YouTube link if you are spectating. It will be published. I believe Jason should be sending it out shortly. Go to the YouTube link.
Make sure to drop a like and subscribe.
Thank you, Mr. Manohar.
All right. So, hi, guys. My name's Liam. I think I've judged for most of you that are looking at the roster here. I think I've judged for most of you. So you can read my full paradigm, but I'm just going to summarize it briefly. When I'm judging, I'm not judging from a debate mindset solely. I'm also judging as just someone who is interested in like politics, right? So I'm going to act like I'm the average American. I'm going to act like I want to be interested in the topic. You have to get me interested in the topic using your debate. You have to sort of explain things to a degree that I think the average American would be able to understand it, that sort of thing. So just make your speeches interesting. And also, congratulations for making it all the way to the final round.
All right, so I guess I'm next. Hi guys, I'm Casey. I've been I did Congress for about 3 years in high school, so I've debated with a lot of you. I see a lot of familiar names on this list, but I haven't judged any rounds so far for this particular tournament, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how you guys will be debating. I'm just gonna keep it really brief because like I said, my paradigm is already on our document. One thing that I really want to emphasize is that I am judging this tournament sitting on my bed. You have to keep me awake. We've all been through those Congress tournaments where it goes on and on forever. So I really want to feel engaged by all of you guys' debating skills. And that's it. So good luck and have fun.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Divya. I've been judging since prelims. This is my third year in debate, third year in Congress. I think all the judges pretty much summarized what we're looking for. Other than that, I'm trying, just don't rehash. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Basically what I've seen since them and prelims is that people are just restating the debate and summarizing it towards the last couple speeches. Try to have unique points, try to refute other people, and look for nuances in the argument. And other than that, just have fun.
All right, that is the last of our judges. We're ready to move into debate, starting with presiding officer. Are there any motions on the floor?
Motion.
Senator Siva,
I move to open the floor for PO nominations.
is there a second?
Second.
Assuming unanimous consent. Also, you don't have to say anything, just use the placards for motions and seconds. Assuming unanimous consent, so ordered. Senator Nalluri,
I move to nominate Representative Karlekar.
do you accept?
I humbly accept.
All right, motion.
Senator Siva,
I move to close the floor for PO nominations.
are there any other nominations on the floor at this time? Seeing none, is there a second to Senator Siva's motion? Assuming unanimous consent, so ordered. Senator Karlekar, congratulations. You'll be our PO for this final session. The chamber is now yours. We're starting at approximately 2:05. We will end at 4:50.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Senator Karlekar and I'm registered as an independent. Thank you for choosing me to be your PO today and congratulations for making it this far. Some of my rules, I will not tolerate any dilatory motions. As a reminder, a dilatory motion is a motion that is made, fails, and is made again, or a motion that needlessly wastes time. For choosing on speakers and questions, I will be going off of precedence, recency, and randomness. I'm sure since you made it this far, I don't need to reiterate what those mean. And for timing, I will be holding up cue cards at 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30 seconds, 2 minutes 55 seconds. At 3 minutes, I'll hold up 2 fists and I'll count down up until 10. At 10, I'll give you a verbal cue to stop. And for direct questioning, I'll hold up a placard at 10 seconds elapsed, and then I'll count down for the last 5 seconds with my fingers. And then we'll move on to the next questioner. Does the parliamentarian have anything to add?
Just make sure that we have questions after every speech. It's a very important part of the debate. And remember the no 3 speeches on the same side rule.
Okay, with that, is there a motion to open the floor?
Motion. To open,
Ms. Rao?
to open the floor for docket nominations.
Second?
Motion.
Senator Siva?
I move to nominate docket A consisting.
I asked for a second for the last motion.
Oh, okay. Second.
Motion.
Assuming unanimous consent. Senator Siva?
Okay, I move to nominate docket A consisting of Northern Triangle, UNCLOS, and Huawei.
Second.
Okay. Is there another docket nomination?
Motion
Motion. State that.
to close the
Honorable.
floor for docket nominations.
Second?
Second.
Okay, assuming unanimous consent. So we will now be moving into debate on the Northern Triangle. Do all the judges and parliamentarian have the legislation? It's titled A Bill to Provide Developmental Aid to the Northern Triangle. Okay, do we have a sponsor present? Senator Nalluri, the floor is yours.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Nalluri. That is Nalluri for the judges and for the parliamentarian. Please give me a smile or nod when you are ready.
Hold on 1 second. One of our judges is having trouble with the legislation, so just sit tight for a moment.
Are we good?
Okay, I think we should be good to go.
Okay, cool. Is the presiding officer ready? Malnutrition, violence, corruption, and poverty. These are just some of the challenges that the people of the Northern Triangle face on a day-to-day basis. Senators, we cannot just sit here and watch as the people of the Northern Triangle suffer at the hands of injustice when we have the resources and the opportunity to improve their lives. which is why I propose today's legislation to send developmental aid to the Northern Triangle because 1, the United States is to blame for the damage in the Northern Triangle, and 2, for the thousands of Central Americans currently suffering. Which brings me to my first point. Now, history shows us that much of the corruption and turmoil that is currently present in the Northern Triangle can be attributed to U.S. intervention. Take the country Guatemala as an example. According to the Public Radio International Organization, in December of 2016, the Guatemalan Civil War started when the United States declared the Guatemalan government a threat to democracy, not out of compassion for the Guatemalan people, but because under the new Guatemalan government, the United States would end up losing a lot of its privately owned land. And it was during this civil war that military regimes supported by the United States employed death squads, utilized torture, and massacred villages. But what makes this so bad is that the government knew about all of these atrocities that were happening and did nothing to stop it. According to journalist Jorge Silva of the New York Times, on May of 2013, a UN Truth Commission report released in 1999 said that the US bore much responsibility for supporting and financing the troops that were recklessly killing people in Guatemala. And Guatemala isn't the only country that the United States intervened in. It was during the Civil War in El Salvador that the United States supported the Salvadoran government to fight its civil war, despite the government publicly terrorizing Salvadoran citizens out of the sake for common policy goals. And it wasn't until the United States made the Honduras a militarized state that eventually led to the corruption, government violence, and political repression that is present in the country today. Thousands of people died in Guatemala, the Honduras, and El Salvador during these wars that the United States played a dominant role in. Section 1 of today's legislation proposes that we donate $1 billion in developmental aid to the Northern Triangle, and that is the least we can do to these people for all of the pain that we have inflicted upon them. Second, pass for the thousands of Central Americans that are suffering today. According to Amelia Cheatham of the Council on Foreign Relations, in October of 2019, the Northern Triangle is one of the poorest regions in the Western Hemisphere. In 2018, all 3 countries ranked in the bottom quartile for the GDP per capita among Latin American states. And according to World Bank data and the United Nations in January of 2019, roughly 60% of Hondurans and Guatemalans live below their country's national poverty lines, compared to 30% of all Latin Americans. We cannot continue to ignore the lives of our Central American population. We are part to blame for their pain. We can't change that, but we can change how we can help them by passing today's legislation.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds exactly for the purposes of the judges. We'll now have 4 blocks of questioning. All questioners, please raise your placards. Okay, Senator Kumar.
Okay, so shouldn't we take stock of our own position before sending foreign aid?
Yes, obviously, but we also have to consider that the conditions in the Northern Triangle are really bad right now, and a lot of it is attributed to our U.S. intervention. So the least we could be doing right now is sending them developmental aid.
Okay, but what about the conditions right now in the United States, like in LA and New York, with virus-prone cities?
I'm not exactly sure how that's relevant to my argument.
Because we're sending foreign aid, but we need to be taking stock of our own position.
Senator Siva?
Hi, Representative. Great speech. But what guarantee do you have that passing this legislation is not going to cause further violence in the region?
Because the least we can do today, we're trying, through this legislation, we're doing the most we can do to help the Northern Triangle.
Okay.
I think that by at least passing this legislation, we're at least doing something rather than nothing.
I completely agree with that, but you said it yourself. U.S. interventions would cause this entire crisis. Just because it's the least we can do, does it actually mean it's the right thing to do?
Doing it out of their own personal interest. Today, our U.S. intervention is for the interest of the people of the Northern Triangle.
Thank you. Senator Rao.
So, Representative, can you tell me what exactly will this bill do if the governments block aid?
Well, the money from this developmental aid will be going to non-governmental organizations.
So, Representative, nothing will happen under this bill if government blocks aid.
I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Well, if you read the bill, nothing happens. So how are we going to hold these governments accountable?
Going to non-governmental organizations, and I do not understand why.
Yourself that there's a lot of corruption in these governments. How are we going to prevent them from blocking aid?
Thank you. Senator Pasquerella.
Hi, is there a reason that we're working indirectly with NGOs as opposed to working in cooperation with the governments?
I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm sure you can tell me.
No, I'm asking you because I want to know, why shouldn't we work with these Central American governments to reduce their corruption?
Well, obviously the Central American government is corrupt, as I stated in my speech, so it's probably better to do it through non-governmental organizations.
Don't you think that working with these governments shines a light on that corruption, however?
No, because these governments are corrupt in itself. It's better to be communicating through the non-governmental organizations.
Okay, questioning period has elapsed. The speaker name and I will be seated. Okay. Is there a speech in the negation? Senator Dileepkumar, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That's Senator Dileepkumar. I'm registered as an independent. I know there's a lot of judges. Are any of you not ready? I'm going to assume all of you are good. Everybody good? Perfect.
Not ready.
Oh, okay.
I'm good now.
All right. I see almost everybody. Perfect. I'll concede one idea to the affirmation. Today's legislation aims to improve the lives of those in the Northern Triangle, but it does so by trivializing the issue with ineffective and downright harmful policy. Don't pass easy legislation for political gain. Pass meaningful legislation that enacts real change. Now, first, the entire affirmation's impacts are predicated on the idea that today's legislation is actually effective in improving people's lives. But that's not the case at all. Bradley Parks of the Washington Post explains on September 19, 2017, that the intense pressure put on aid agencies leads to the creation of agencies and laws that don't enforce the policy they create. That happens because there's very poor infrastructure in the Northern Triangle. When these laws aren't enforced, we see worsening corruption. Representative Nalluri explains government corruption is a serious issue. Creating more agencies that don't do anything only worsens that corruption and worsens poor investments as well. Kevin Thief of the Washington Post explains on November 4, 2019, that lenders supported by USAID in Guatemala are funding illegal immigration because of the poor vetting of the loans they give out that are supposed to help industries. But it's not helping industries. Representative Nalluri says that the government knew about the atrocities and didn't stop them before. You know about this atrocity. Stop this. But second, let's understand exactly why today's legislation doesn't just have a net zero. It has a net harm to the people that we're trying to help in the first place. John Washington, a leading expert of the Northern Triangle, explains in an April 11, 2019 report that U.S. financial assistance to the Northern Triangle was used to prop up an exploitative and environmentally destructive export economy. And that happens because a lot of the funds that are supposed to go to helping specific industries to boost the economy as a whole aren't doing that. Instead, it's going to poorly managed palm oil financing, oil extraction, and other activities that destroy the economy in this region. Representative Nalluri, you say that the Northern Triangle is among the poorest regions in the world. You're absolutely right. Many of the people living here are small farmers that need the environment to make their everyday livelihood go through. But today's legislation destroys that environment and it destroys that livelihood in the process. Kurt Semple of the New York Times explains on April 13, 2019, that environmental degradation has forced small farms in Guatemala and Honduras to flee to the United States because of the increasing violence and lack of proper income in their home countries. Today's legislation, if you look at Section 1, it gives $1 billion. It gives $1 billion to destroy people's lives, to worsen our immigration problem in the process. It's time that this Congress finally stops trivializing real issues. Don't put political gain over the needs of our constituents and those we seek to help. Stand and fail.
For the purposes of the judges, thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 1 second. We are now in line for 4 blocks of questioning. All questioners, please raise your placard. That'll go to Senator McAuliffe.
Okay, so aid was recently reinstated, right? So what's been the effect of aid in the Northern Triangle?
So the effect of aid in the Northern Triangle is basically poorly managed aid. We're giving out aid to all these industries that basically worsen corruption and worsen the lack of proper enforcement.
What year was that source from?
That was basically from 2019. Every single source I cited was from 2019.
Okay, well, we pulled away aid in 2019, then we put it back because of those corruption issues. So hasn't that been mitigated since that source?
No, because we haven't changed how we're enforcing that corruption.
Oh, didn't we? We reinstated aid.
Senator Rubas?
Okay, so you gave us a handful of examples of corrupt NGOs, but does that mean that all NGOs in the region are inherently corrupt?
Okay, so the issue isn't the NGOs, right? The issue is the agency giving money to the NGOs. The US aid simply isn't effective in choosing the right NGOs to give money to.
Okay, but under this legislation, they have to make a proposal. So can't we just make sure that the proposal is an effective one?
Those proposals to be properly vetted by USAID.
Okay, but can't we use this money to build that infrastructure?
Don't you believe that by doing something, it's better than doing nothing in the first place, which is what you suggest?
Sure, doing something is better than doing nothing, but today's legislation does a net harm, not a
Then
net
why can't we pass today's legislation and then pass further legislation?
Because today's legislation gives money to the Northern Triangle. We're wasting money if we pass today.
Can you enlighten me how it's a waste of money?
We're wasting money because we're giving money to specific organizations that works in our immigration problem in the Northern Triangle and works in the economy of that lake region as well.
Is there another question? Okay. Senator McAuliffe.
Okay, so let's focus on that argument, right? When we reinstated aid, what were the differences from before aid to when the United States pulled it out to now?
So basically the biggest difference was that they said, oh, there's a lot of corruption, let's take away the money. But the reality is, in the period that they took away the money, they didn't do anything to actually make sure that that corruption doesn't rise up again.
What period was that?
That was in 2019.
Yeah, for how long?
I don't know, a couple months.
Okay, so you're saying that no reforms were made that considered the administration to re-put aid back into the Northern Triangle?
No considerations were made to make sure that that aid that we're going to put back is actually effective in helping people's lives.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, do we have a speech in the affirmation? Senator Dammalapati.
I thank the chair. Good morning, fellow senators. I am Senator Dammalapati, spelled Dammalapati. I stand at the leisure of all those above me, so please give me a nod or a smile when you're ready. Is anyone not ready? Violence. Oh, sorry. Violence, abuse, poverty, unemployment. It's time the United States stops ignoring such prevalent issues and help our allies out of our own self-interest, obligation, and compassion. Today, fellow Congress members, stand with me and affirm today's legislation because 1, passing this legislation results in no fiscal disadvantage, and 2, because it benefits the United States. But first, let's affirm because there's no economic harm. According to a study by the Congressional Research Service, over the last 2 years, approximately $1.3 billion has been allocated. But this amount only makes up 2% of the entire fiscal year of 2017 international budget. And for this relatively small price, we're making a relatively large difference. Let's take a look at each country before and after aid was provided. According to the North Carolina Journal of International Law by Claire Smith on April 19, 2019, in El Salvador and Honduras, 20% and 23% respectively live in a crime-filled neighborhood. And in Guatemala, 16% faces severe chronic insecurity. Senator Dileepkumar comes up here and talks about real change. We are creating real change by passing today's legislation. After aid, USAID has reported success stories in all 3 countries. This includes a homicide decrease in Guatemala, lifting thousands of families out of poverty in the Honduras. Financial aid has been able to keep families in extreme poverty afloat. But the sudden drawback has only caused a catastrophe in this region. But second, let's affirm this legislation because it benefits the United States and serves American interests. The United States government is struggling to respond to another large wave of migrants fleeing poverty, violence, and corruption in the Central American region. Because of this, we need to re-examine the current policies we have in place. According to The Hill by Raul Reyes on April 3rd, 2019, sadly, there is indeed a humanitarian crisis at our southern border. In February, 76,000 migrants were taken into custody after entering the country illegally or being stopped at checkpoints. But the only solution to this problem is addressing the root cause. Now, let's see how funding the Northern Triangle can decrease illegal immigration. During cross-examination, Senator Siva asked if this bill is the right thing to do, and let's see how it is. According to a Duke study by Sarah Bermer on June 25, 2019, research also demonstrates that foreign aid can reduce drivers of forced migration, such as local violence and food insecurity. Targeting aid to local communities with high migration and asylum seekers is the best option. Funds spent on job training and preventing gun violence has stopped migrants from coming to the United States. But now, they're left with no other option unless we pass today's legislation. We must facilitate intergovernmental coordination around asylum and protection efforts and solve the root causes of forced displacement. Obligation, compassion, self-interest. We can achieve all of this by passing today's bill, so stand and affirm.
For the purposes of the judges, that was a speech time of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards. Senator Bole.
Okay, so you seem really, really concerned with the refugee crisis, right?
Right.
What's actually preventing the maximum amount of refugees from flooding our borders? Our border with Mexico or Mexico's border with Guatemala?
Well, there is still a migrant crisis in the northern region.
Yeah, you didn't answer my question, but it's actually Mexico's border with Guatemala.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be much more effective if we just funded that border? Because that's what we're currently doing.
We can pass a separate legislation for that too, but in addition, we cannot ignore
not effective in doing the things that you state in your speech, which is blatantly harmful, correct?
Actually, no. As I did prove in my
it would be, because it's just a waste of money when we could be focusing somewhere
else. The questioning time has elapsed. Thank you. Senator Parsotan, your question.
Hi, great. So you talked about how there's no fiscal disadvantage to this legislation for the simple fact that only 2% of the budget is going to actually be harmed if we were to pass. But then you cite statistics that just say like, oh, there's a lot of like harm in the region, crime in the region. But like, how exactly does this bill specifically solve for the issue?
Oh, right. I did say it about all the harms, but what I did correlate is that because we're providing aid, violence and poverty in this region is being reduced, and that's the exact reason why we need to pass this legislation so we can reduce more poverty and bring violence elapsed. I thank the chair.
The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all speeches in the negation. Senator Rao.
I thank the chair. That is Rao, spelled R-A-O, speaking for the first time in this legislative session. Could the presiding officer just give me a thumbs up when all the judges are ready? I can't see them. I am from an independent. Where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Representative, their civil bloods are on our civil hands. We are responsible, I agree. But by passing this bill today, all we do is give them empty threats of inaction. So we negate today because this bill incentivizes short-term improvement. Now, Section 3 and 4 of this bill states that U.S. aid shall be tasked with determining the effectiveness of NGOs over 5 years. This incentivizes aid agencies to help in the short term rather than actually make effects in the long term. Now, the International Studies Quarterly reports by Bradley Park in 2017, countries are able to access grants are more likely to select cosmetic measures of success in institution binding. But countries that receive long-term investments are more likely to select meaningful measures of institutional performance rather than an effective solution. Representative Dammalapati comes up here and tells you that there are literally no economic harms coming from this bill. But I'm here to tell you that we are putting money into something that's not actually going to change anything. I see that as an economic loss. Now, the Washington Post article by James Ron, a political science professor, in July 2017, continues this by saying the establishment of nominally independent anti-corruption agencies or the passage of anti-human trafficking legislation. The adoption of this cosmetic reform allows everyone involved, mainly NGOs, to declare victory. This is what Representative Dammalapati was talking about. in the USAID success stories. It's not a success story. It's a superficial cover-up to what's actually happening. These aid agencies are under intense pressure to produce immediate results. These pressures create perverse incentives for developing countries to pursue shallow but highly visible reforms. Representatives, nothing is changing in the status quo with the passage of this bill. All we are doing is just funneling money into something that doesn't actually work. But also, we negate today for something that wasn't even brought up in any other speech, because there is literally no punishment if government blocks aid. Now, Representative Nalluri talks about the corruption in the government. But if the government is corrupt, then there is still a high chance that they will block or take the aid and use it a wrong way. Nowhere in this bill does it suggest any punishment will occur to the government of the Northern Triangle if they block or misuse aid. This means we have no influence. This means we have no chance of influencing the corrupt governments of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. I believe that the most logical thing to do is sanction them under the Magnitsky Act. Now, Washington University in 2016 tells us that the Magnitsky Act is a blacklist, a symbol of judgment of guilt. And the U.S. temporarily cutting off ties with the Northern Triangle and internationally condemning them. Now, the Moscow Times, a Mark Nucleus, an international journalist, writes in 2012 that if the accused officials are guilty of humanitarian and political abuses, being globally stepped on is a vocal punishment. These officials lose all of their money and assets in the United States under the Magnitsky Act. But under this bill, we don't do anything. No suspension of aid, no suspension of NGOs. No legitimate harm comes to the officials charged. No legitimate harm comes to the government. Only harm comes to the people. The Magnitsky Act acts as a direct punishment to the government and is the only legitimate way for aid to work. This bill enables us to do nothing in the status quo, negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. We are now in line for questions. All questioners, please rise. Senator Rubas.
Okay, so what is the net negative if we offer aid to a country and they reject it?
It's not that they're rejecting it, Representative, it's that they're using the money for the wrong things. Corrupt governments do that.
Okay, but we're giving the money to the NGOs, not to the governments.
As I said in my first contention, NGOs actually perform superficial things to quote unquote achieve success.
Okay, so if our concern is once again with the corruption of these NGOs, why don't we just pick NGOs that aren't as corrupt?
Because this literally happens in almost every case of USAID, in situations where it's short-term aid.
Okay, but in the past, has USAID put a significant amount of time into making sure the NGOs aren't corrupt?
Representative
Senator Dammalapati.
Hi, Senator. So in your speech, you talked about how this bill is ineffective. But in my speech, I showed a direct correlation between providing aid and a homicide and poverty decrease in the Northern Triangle region. So aren't we already creating chains? Why shouldn't we continue with this funding?
Representative, it's not specifically this exact funding that's causing that to happen. What's happening with this bill is that we're funding NGOs to perform superficial measures to quote unquote achieve success.
So you're saying that no change is happening in the Northern Triangle right now, despite all these studies?
No change.
Question period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
Before we move on to the next speech, Madam Sign Officer, could you tell us what your questioning signals are again? Because the placards don't match up with the actual timing.
This is at 10 seconds, and then this is the last 5 seconds.
So that's at 10 seconds, not 10 seconds remaining.
No, 10 seconds elapsed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing as that was a speech in the negation, I'm now looking for a speech in the affirmation. All affirmation speakers, please rise. That'll go to Senator Rubas.
Point of inquiry.
Yes, state that.
Could you switch your questioning to change it to 10 seconds, like remaining?
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. I thank the chair. This is Senator Joey Rubas, spelled R-U-B-A-S, from Naperville Central High School. Are there any judges not ready?
What school was that?
Naperville Central High School. Good. Everyone good? Awesome. Let's get started. In the past 2 months, each and every one of our lives have changed in an uncountable number of ways. But perhaps what's most terrifying about this situation is the fact that we, in many ways, are lucky. It's because today's legislation is the solution we need to help the Northern Triangle with this coronavirus pandemic that we have to affirm today. Now, first, I'm frankly quite disturbed that none of the other senators on my side so far have referenced how today's legislation is going to help with this coronavirus pandemic. So I'll address it. Now, first, let's turn to journalist Sandra Cupp in Al Jazeera on April 21st of 2020, when she tells us that 2 deputy health ministers in Guatemala were fired this week amid revelations of a corruption ring inside the ministry. And then turn to journalist Ana Murgida from Al Jazeera on March 27th, when she tells us that Honduras, one of these 3 countries, has the weakest healthcare system in the world and was already on the verge of collapse before this coronavirus pandemic. Finally, turn to the same author on April 22nd of 2020, when she tells us that in all 3 countries, impoverished citizens who have been unable to work are protesting in the streets for food. Representatives, what's increasingly clear in this debate is that these countries need our help. When the coronavirus pandemic strikes and these countries aren't ready, that means these citizens are being hurt. Mr. Kumar, I understand your concerns about us not addressing our own problems first, but understand helping New York and helping the Northern Triangle are not mutually exclusive. But second, let's actually take a look at the specific action today's legislation takes to fix the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the World Health Organization reported on March 16th of 2020 that the best way to strengthen day-to-day operations in the Northern Triangle is to work with key global organizations and NGOs. They then go on to list some specific NGOs that are helping with the situation already. Let's take a look at one. Doctors Without Borders, who has already launched coronavirus response in 2 out of the 3 countries, and reports in 2018 that in the country with the weakest healthcare in the world, Honduras, they were able to do 11,000 outpatient consultations. Mr. Dileepkumar and Rao, I understand your concerns about the corruption of NGOs in the region, but what you have to understand is that I just gave you a list of specific NGOs who are not corrupt and are helping this situation. When we pass today's legislation, we send a significant amount of money to countries who need it right now, meaning that less people will die. Representatives, the coronavirus pandemic is bad for us, but it's far worse for these countries who could never have seen it coming. When tens of thousands, if not millions of lives are on the line, the only thing we can do is pass today's legislation, support these countries' response.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. We are now in line for questioning. All questioners, please rise. That'll go to Senator Dileepkumar.
Hi, Senator. So far in today's debate, we've established that U.S. aid is corrupt, NGOs are corrupt, and the Northern Triangle governments are also corrupt. So why exactly should we pass?
Okay, 2 things. We have direct oversight over U.S. aid. So if they're corrupt, that's something that we can fix. And 2, I just showed you NGOs that the World Health Organization says are reputable in this region. So I don't know how.
When in the past have we fixed U.S. aid corruption effectively?
So of course we haven't. That's why it's still bad, but that doesn't mean we still can't pass legislation to do that.
Questioning period is elapsed. Senator Siva.
Is questioning time still elapsed?
That question box.
Okay. So High Representative Rubas, I will concede the fact that maybe some NGOs aren't completely corrupt. But if you're providing $1 billion of aid to the Northern Triangle, what's the guarantee that more than 50% of that aid will actually reach them if only some NGOs are actually not corrupt in the first place?
Well, the important thing is that we don't have to spread this money evenly across all of the NGOs in the region. USAID gets to pick which NGOs get the money. So we just pick out the ones that aren't corrupt.
Wait, can you tell me which ones are actually not corrupt in the first place?
I just gave you a World Health Organization article that listed 10 of them. One of them was Doctors Without Borders.
Questioning period is elapsed. Thank you. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was the speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. That'll go to Senator Siva.
I thank the chair. I'm Representative Siva, spelled S-I-V-A, speaking for the negation. Please give me a smile or a nod when you're ready, and I'll begin. Is anyone not ready? No? Okay. There has long been a strong monopoly on violence in the Northern Triangle, further destroying the happiness left in the region. Let's destroy this reality by not supplying weak forms of aid, and let's completely fill this legislation. The rest of the negation have championed the debate by talking about how other forms of aid are completely obsolete. But let me bring up a point that no one has even thought of bringing up. It increases gang membership. According to an April 2019 Brookings report by Bermeo, the increase in aid sent to the Northern Triangle to try to increase stability in the region has caused an increase in anti-crime policies in the region, which have expanded the police powers and enacted harsher punishments for gang members to try to decrease violence in the region. And Representative Dammalapati has agreed with this entire rhetoric. But let me show why this entire part is wrong. According to an October 2019 CFR report by Cheatham, this legislation does the complete opposite of what I just stated earlier. Due to the oppression on gang members, it has failed to reduce crime completely and has led to the growth of gang members in prisons, leading to mass incarceration. Because we're seeing children and more gang members going to these prisons, these gang members can take advantage of the overpopulation in these prisons and take advantage of converting children and other minors into gang members in the first place. The same report showed that developing aid in the Northern Triangle increases corruption by over 10%. This increases the burden on already overcrowded prisons where gangs recruit thousands of new members and increase violence in the region constantly. The United States and its allies believe that cutting down crime will stop violence in the region. For what I just stated earlier proves that this entire part is wrong. As Senator Rao and Dileepkumar championed the debate by showing how our aid is not reaching our citizens in the first place, we need to realize that this legislation is not changing anything in the status quo. And now let's look at why the affirmation points fall to the negation. Now let's look at why Senator Dammalapati's points related to how it does not provide economic harm is completely wrong. According to Senator Dileepkumar and Rao, this aid is actually not reaching anyone. But according to a December 2018 Pew Research Center report by PASO, in 2015, Obama gave $750 million as development aid to the Northern Triangle. With absolutely no change seen for the next 3 years, President Trump in 2018 gave about $615 million to the Northern Triangle. Still absolutely seeing no change in the Northern Triangle, we're sitting here in today's Congress trying to give about $1 billion to the Northern Triangle. In the affirmative world, we're going to be continuing to give more and more money to the Northern Triangle. Just because we double the amount of money we're giving to the Northern Triangle doesn't change anything in the status quo. Senator Rubas says that we're actually decreasing the amount of people afflicted by COVID-19 by passing such legislation. But what Representative Dileepkumar and Rao have said time and time again, our aid is not going to reach them in the first place. And when I asked Senator Rubas in questioning, he said there are NGOs that actually do something. But Senator Dileepkumar has already said earlier, our aid has not done nothing in the past, and because past presidents have shown us that this aid does nothing in the past and will do nothing in the future, we must negate. The death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 1 million people is pure statistics. Let's keep this in mind and not let any of this corrupt our changes in the future.
Thank you. The speech time has elapsed.
You are muted, sorry.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. All questioners, please rise. Senator Nalluri.
Hi, Senator. Great speech, but I'm a little confused. How does us sending developmental aid to stop corruption and violence lead to the formation of more gang violence?
Okay, before I even address gang violence, I need to address that I've stated past precedents before. We have addressed development aid to the Northern Triangle countless times. President Obama did it every year. President Trump did it every year. Because we did it every single year, we're seeing more and more corruption in the region. Just because we sent aid in the past and it did not work. So sending
we have sent US aid previously and we stopped it and we resent it again.
But I told you it didn't work in the past.
Senator Pasquerella.
Hi, Senator. So do you think that this legislation will be successful at making sure that we can have more starving citizens of the Northern Triangle receive food?
As I said in my speech, we gave $500 million, $500 million every single year to the Northern Triangle to try to increase the amount of food in the region. It did not work in the past and it will not work in the future. I completely agree with the rhetoric given by the affirmation that children are starving every single day. But providing incomplete aid and ineffective aid is not going to change the status
quo. But in the status quo, isn't it more important that we feed those that are starving?
But in the affirmative
questioning period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Mr. Senator Perez, please state that.
Exit chamber.
Granted. That speech will go to Senator McAuliffe.
I thank the chair, and then I don't want to miss any of the judges, so if the PO could just give me any indication when they're ready, that would be great. Once again, this is Representative Katie McAuliffe from Illinois, but I'm listed as an independent.
I'm so sorry. If you could just give me like a minute to finish up the last person's ballot and get started on yours. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, of course.
What's
Just
your
let me know.
school?
I'm listed as an independent.
Independent, gotcha. While we're waiting, presiding officer, what number speech is this?
This is the 7th speech.
I'm ready.
Okay, so is everyone ready? Awesome. On our border today, there is a 10-year-old being pushed across it, having told to go into a new land without their parents, without their family. Well, if my 10-year-old brother gets lost in the grocery store, he starts to panic, let alone starting a new life. Well, our aid today is what is able to prevent the immigration crisis that we see not only on our border, but across the world. What this legislation boils down to is, one, the actual effectiveness of aid. And secondly, why do we need to increase aid to the Northern Triangle right now? So Representative Dileepkumar mentioned that aid is not effective because our agencies, such as USAID, are simply unsuccessful. However, that is not the case. For this, I turned to U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, a nonprofit organization examining the state of Central American affairs as of April of 2019, which explains that aid creates economic development. For example, in the Western Highlands region of Guatemala, an area especially prone to migration based on data from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, USAID agricultural programming helped increase rural farmer sales by 51% and created 20,000 jobs in agriculture. So Representative Dammalapati already explained how it decreases homicide. What we can also see is that our aid increases economic gain. So when Representative Dileepkumar says that it worsens immigration, this is simply not true because of our economic intervention. Now, Representative Siva also champions the same line, saying that it will increase gang numbers, but a worse economic situation leads to increased crime. Thus, if we want to decrease crime, if we want to decrease homicides, we stand in the affirmation. So secondly, let's focus on exactly why we need this legislation right now. So Representative Rubas already focused on how it's going to help specifically in the time of COVID-19 to provide medical supplies. But let's look at how it will continue economic development. For this, we turn to NPR journalist Perry Khan as of 2020, which explains in 2019, immigrant workers in the U.S. sent an estimated $150 billion to Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically centered in the Northern Triangle. But with COVID-19, when the Latin American economy relies on exports that have been hurt and remittances, which are no longer being sent because of this economic crisis we are seeing across the world, it is clear that the people living within Latin America are only going to be hurt. But let's focus on Representative Rao's argument, saying that countries shouldn't be able to receive short-term aid. When we focus on what this legislation does, we realize why we must pass. The reason why Section 3 and 4 is listed is because of adding a $2 million more in aid per year, $2 billion more in aid per year. The impact of this is that we already have an amount that goes to the Northern Triangle. But when we send even more aid, we mitigate those economic harms, meaning that section listed in this legislation is why we pass. We are already increasing long-term development. Let's continue to do that. Pass.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please rise. That'll go to Senator Parsotan.
Hi. So what specific instances have we seen that our aid, even though it's been decreasing, has had a benefit in the region thus far?
I'm confused on what you mean by decreasing. So
right. So because of the whole 2019, we're giving back the aid from 2016 to 2019, we actually decreased the amount of aid that we gave to the Northern Triangle by 30%. Because we've decreased this aid, have we still been seeing the same benefits that we got in the past from aiding the Northern Triangle?
Okay, well, that was an article from 2019. It just shows our long-term development and investment in the region, which has been able to spur the economic development. Not only that, but even because we decreased aid in the past, it gives us even more of a reason to increase it now.
Right, but who do we distribute that aid through?
nonprofit organizations.
Senator Bole. Senator Bole, I believe you're muted. Do you not have a question? Okay, then the question will go to Senator Rao.
Thank you, Representative. So is 5 years a relatively short time?
Well, here's the thing, right? It's because we're sending even more aid in that 5-year period.
Yes, is 5 years a relatively short time? It's not a quarter of a generation, Representative. If we're sending $200 million each year over 5 years, is that going to make a long-term impact?
Yeah, because we're already sending aid. Your misconception in the argument is that we're no longer going to be sending aid after this.
5 years long. Why not increase the aid that will last for generations rather than increase aid that will...
Thank you. The questioning period has lapsed.
Representative.
Senator Dileepkumar, you have a motion?
Point of personal privilege to exit the chamber.
Granted.
Thank you.
Senator Perez, state that. Granted.
Real quick, I just want to say, if anyone's having technical difficulties with like unmuting or anything like that, just put it in the chat really quick so the presiding officer can see it, and so we're not relying on like hand motions to try and communicate. Thank you.
Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all speeches in negation, please rise. That will go to Senator Kumar.
This is Senator Kumar speaking for the first time this legislative session. I'm not representing a school. That's spelled Kumar. Are any judges not ready? Okay. As one of the largest nations in the world, we provide aid to a large amount of countries. However, this Congress cannot become influenced to pursue foreign aid when our constituents are struggling. Negate today because educational aid is not adequately used, and we should not be offering that aid. And in times of COVID-19 and other viruses, we need to be focusing on our own constituents. But now to my first point, that educational aid is not adequately used. Both sides of this debate have brought up cases on financial and medical aid. However, let me tell you the real effect of educational aid that nobody brings up and what the affirmation fails to realize. According to David Archer, the head of program of Action Aid of The Guardian, on June 25th, 2014, our aid is invested in a disproportionate percentage of developmental countries' school budget on tertiary education, which benefits a small but powerful elite. Educational aid is serving high-class individuals, disadvantaging these countries' citizens and creating inequality for them to pursue a better life. We can see this when we send our aid to similar issues in Northern Africa. We expect our aid to serve all citizens. However, with no actual educational purpose of this legislation, we cannot focus on educational aid to help developing countries. And this is further an issue because we should not be offering aid. According to an article of Bendix by Business Insider on September 27, 2018, the US was once a leader for education. Now it ranks 27th in the world. We cannot afford to offer aid when our education system ranks so low. We come 38th in math rankings and 24th in science. With our aid, how can these developmental countries feed off our aid? This Congress may continue to discuss other forms of aid. However, when it comes to our low-grade educational system, we need to focus on problems here at home. Once we reform our educational system, we will be in a more able position to provide. But now to my second point, that in times of COVID-19 and other viruses, we need to focus on our own constituents. When I asked Representative Nalluri, she failed to answer my question about COVID-19. And Representative Rubas proposes to help countries who have much less cases than we do. But let me tell you what we should actually do. According to an article by George Ingram of Brookings on October 2nd, 2019, America provides more aid than any other country. In times of COVID-19, our constituents are struggling. With $200 million of aid every year, we are not accounting for the possible effects of viruses like COVID-19 on our constituents in the coming years. Economic and medical aid should be pushing our constituents out of virus-prone times instead of keeping our constituents in a spiral of harmful effects. We need to be prioritizing ourselves and helping our constituents. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. We are now in line for questioning. All questioners, please rise. And I'll go to Senator Nalluri.
Hi, Senator. So has Congress already passed relief packages for the coronavirus?
Yes, however, as we can see in cities like New York and Los Angeles, we need to adequately deal with this issue, and it's not happening.
Packages for the coronavirus. Why can't we just also use some of our?
Why do we have one of the highest case rates?
I'm sorry, what?
Then why do we have one of the highest case rates? We need to be focusing more on this issue and not sending foreign aid.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't. It's not mutually exclusive for us to be getting.
Yes, however, until we can fix issues here at home, then we can focus on foreign aid.
Senator Rubas.
Hi, Mr. Kumar. So do these countries have less cases because they're less infected or because they've tested less?
I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me?
Okay, so these countries are massive countries with no healthcare infrastructure, and they've got about 250 cases a pop. It's because they've done no testing. So for our own safety, to prevent the spread of coronavirus, doesn't it make sense to help them in that domain?
Okay, so do you suggest focusing on foreign aid or helping our constituents here at home?
We already work to help our constituents.
We don't know. They aren't testing.
Thank
we don't
you.
know if they're
Questioning
infected.
period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Senator Dileepkumar, state that. Granted. Okay, seeing as that was a speech in a negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. I'll go to Senator Gao.
I thank the chair. As a reminder, I am Representative Gao, spelled G-A-O, and I'm independent, and this is my first time speaking for today. So, Pio, can you just give me a thumbs up when everybody's ready, because I can't see the judges.
Just give me a minute, please.
Is everybody ready?
Are the judges ready?
Everybody's ready, okay. The domino effect. This is the case when it comes to the Northern Triangle. To stop the dominoes from all crashing down, we need to not allow the very first one, the cause, to fall down and cause a chain reaction. This is why it is imperative that we affirm today's legislation, because we help the migration issue, and B, it isn't like how the negation portrays it to be. This brings me to my first contention, immigrants. Senator Dammalapati and McAuliffe mentioned this, but let me explain upon this and explain why immigrants, especially illegal ones, are so important and help our constituents so much, Senator Kumar. According to a New York Times article written by Vivian Davis on March 6, 2017, there are 11 million illegal immigrants in the U.S. The best estimates say laboring in American fields, atop half-built towers, and in restaurant kitchens, and swelling American classrooms, detention centers, and immigration courts. This number leads to America scrambling, trying to stop the effect of the problem, such as getting rid of backlogged courts, when in reality, we should be stopping the root of the problem, how unsafe the nations that they came from were. Additionally, this situation is going to continue to get worse if we do not need to do anything, which is why it's imperative that we pass this bill now. According to a Costa Rica news article written on December 11th, 2017, the number of immigrants in the U.S. from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras rose by 25% from 2007 to 2015, in contrast to more modest growth of the country's overall foreign-born population and a decline from neighboring countries such as Mexico. This situation is horrible right now and only keeps getting worse and worse. This is why it is imperative that we take action, inevitably stopping long-term damage and detrimental effects to the U.S. economy. Now, let's understand why the negation is incorrect. Senators Kumar, Rao, Dileepkumar, Parsotan, and Siva all say that U.S. assistance is a waste of time because it will only lead to a waste of money and corruption. However, currently, according to a July 2019 U.S. Global Leadership leadership coalition, the amount of funding the U.S. provides has been decreased by nearly 30% from 2016 to 2019. And today, assistance to the Northern Triangle is just at 0.035% of the current federal budget. Yet, even with such a small percentage of the federal budget being used, one valuable return the U.S. has been receiving in its giving of foreign aid to other developing countries has been an increase in American jobs as well as trade. This is because foreign aid is much like an investment. It helps forge the foundation needed for low-income countries to build up and become middle-income, sustainable states. And additionally, it helps our economy tremendously. According to another U.S. Global Leadership Coalition article written in January 4th, 2016, we earned about a few $1 billion just from trade. Let's stop all these dominoes from falling down. In order to do so, affirm.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That'll go to Senator Dileepkumar.
Hi, so the U.S. has passed aid to the Northern Triangle before, right?
Wait, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
So the U.S. has passed aid to the Northern Triangle before, right?
Yeah.
So in the last 6 months, how many Southwest border apprehensions have we had from the Northern Triangle?
I'm not sure. Can you enlighten me?
It's about 190,000. If U.S. aid is actually effective, why do we have so many people fleeing the Northern Triangle?
Well, we saw that when we decreased foreign aid, there wasn't as
Thank
much
you,
growth
Senator
in the economy.
Bouncing off that previous line of questioning, why are these people leaving their countries in the first place?
Because their country is unsafe. And this is exactly what this legislation do. We provide funding to make it so they don't leave their country.
The government corruption and because of gang violence. Now, Representative Siva already addressed that gang violence actually rises under U.S. aid. Can you tell me how aid will get to our constituents if government is corrupt?
As previous senator said, we're working with NGOs, and we can selectively determine which NGOs we work with.
Government corruption and prevent people from emigrating.
We do this by providing funding, which is what this bill does.
Thank you. Questioning period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Senator Rubas, do you have a motion?
A motion to approach the chair with an amendment.
Granted.
Okay, so I'll send the amendment in the chat.
Yeah, just put it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, we will determine if that's germane. Seeing as that was his speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. Senator Bole.
I thank the chair. That's Senator Bole, spelled B-O-L-E. My first initial is J. I'm having some technical difficulties, so sorry about that earlier for the mic muting problem. It's being very laggy today. Can I just get a sign if any of my judges are not ready? Okay.
It seems like one judge is not ready.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Ana was only 17 years old when 8 gang members broke into her Guatemalan home and sexually assaulted her. She tells press that while it was happening, she wondered 2 things. Why was it happening, and what can it be done to stop this? We ask the same question to this atrocity today regarding our foreign policy, when we come to the fundamental conclusion that you answer today's debate with a negative ballot. So first, you're going to be negating because Ms. Nalluri, you are our sponsor. You state that this legislation is going to be inherently effective. But let me reword that for you. This is really weird because a New York Times article proves that when we send aid, specifically developmental aid, what this legislation calls for to the Northern Triangle, we didn't actually see the positive results that you mentioned. This literally changes nothing in the status quo, and that's a net negative because it's an inherent waste of money. I'm not putting lives over money here, but with this legislation having an inherent inability to actually be effective, we have to fail today's legislation. Next, Ms. Dammalapati. Legislation reduces the refugee crisis, which sounds like a really great idea. Except just as I proved to you inside of questioning, it doesn't actually do that. Because as the Woodrow Wilson Center tells us, the Mexico-Guatemalan border is where the majority of the refugee crisis is actually stopped going into the United States. So if the United States government, us, wants to decrease the refugee crisis as much as possible, we're going to be sending this developmental aid to Mexico so they can fortify their Guatemalan border. Because as Al Jazeera puts it, this border is very, very effective in stopping a looming refugee crisis, as it has been noted as the Iron Wall or the Invisible Wall by the Mexican people. It's fortified by mainly Mexican immigration forces, and if this Congress really wants to make an impact, you would pass legislation that inherently helps stuff like that. This legislation wouldn't actually be helping the immigration crisis. So let's fail today and then pass effective legislation tomorrow. Next, Mr. Rubas, you mentioned how NGOs are really, really effective, but previous negation speakers have already proven to you the exact opposite, because we've already proven that along with the governments in the Northern Triangle being corrupt, some of the NGOs that the USAID could actually enlist are corrupt, and USAID itself is corrupt. We have to assume that USAID is going to have total control over what NGOs they enlist when we pass today's legislation, because today's legislation doesn't actually mention what specific NGOs we're going to be using. You mentioned all of these good ones that aren't corrupt, but because we don't actually list them in the legislation today, we have no way to actually ensure that it's going to be effective. Next, Ms. McAuliffe. You mentioned how this legislation is going to be effective in solving the refugee crisis, but I have that same response earlier that I already mentioned regarding Ms. Dammalapati's speech. Literally every single negation senator has proven to you all today that we're not going to be reducing the refugee crisis, and that's why you failed today's legislation.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. We will now be moving into questioning. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, it will go to Senator Gao.
So at the highest ground of the affirmation, do we improve the Northern Triangle?
Yeah, of course, but the problem is it's not the highest ground.
So at this highest ground. So
yeah, it's not
then,
though.
But theoretically, if we did that, would we help
end the
immigration
but that
crisis?
Theory is if we enlisted specific NGOs, we
yeah, then why can't we do that with further legislation?
Because this legislation is the legislation we're debating today. I'm not debating that. I'm debating this.
Yeah, but it's for a good cause, right?
Okay, it's for a great cause, but the problem is it's not going to be effective because it's proven ineffective in the past.
Yeah, why can't we just choose specific?
Because it's literally not worked.
Senator Nalluri.
Hi, Senator. So Section 3 of this legislation clearly states that USAID, with oversight from us, will use a proposal process to select the best NGOs to send developmental aid to. Why is this stopping us from sending actual aid to correct NGOs?
Let's go through a line of logic that previous senators have already brought us through, right? NGOs, some of them are corrupt, right? USAID is inherently corrupt. These governments that we're giving money to are inherently corrupt. What we're going to be assuming is that there's 3 levels of corruption when you pass, and that's something that I can't actually support.
Thank you. Questioning period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
I thank the chair.
Okay, since an amendment was proposed and the parliamentarian ruled it germane, I'm going to read it out loud. Okay, so the amendment is add a section B stating that the Congressional Subcommittee on State, Foreign Operations, and related programs will oversee the NGO approval process.
Do you have a copy of this for the judges?
It's in the chat.
Sorry, thanks.
Are all the judges good? Okay, is there a second to enter this amendment into debate? I'm Senator Dileepkumar. We now need a 1/3 vote to actually put this into debate. So if you're in favor of debating this amendment,
you need a 1/3 second. So you should count all the seconds, and if it doesn't meet the 1/3, then you don't debate it.
I'm sorry. I need a 1/3 second. All those who second the amendment. Okay, so that does meet the 1/3 required to debate the amendment. Would anyone like Senator Dileepkumar?
I move to previous question on the amendments.
Second. All those in favor? Okay, we'll now be moving to previous question on the amendment. All those in favor, please raise your placard and put it down when I say your name. Senator Dileepkumar, Senator Bole, Senator Kumar, Senator Nalluri, Senator Siva, Senator Rubas, Senator McAuliffe, Senator Dammalapati, Senator Parsotan, Senator Gao, and Senator Rao. Okay, so with 11 votes, all those against? Any abstentions? Senator Perez? On a vote of 11 to 0 to 1, this amendment does pass. Okay, now we are going to debate with the amendment.
Point of inquiry.
Yes, Senator Siva.
Aren't there 14 people in the chamber, so then 13 people are voting? You said 11 to 0 to 1. Or am I mistaken?
It was 11 to 1 to 1.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's what it was.
I'm sorry, did someone vote in the negation? I didn't see your placard. Sorry, Senator Pasquerella. So on a vote of 11 to 1 to 1, this amendment does pass. We will now be moving on to an affirmation speech with the amendment. So all of those in the affirmation that goes to Senator Parsotan.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon to all the judges. My name is VJ Parsotan. Last name spelled Parsotan, speaking for the first time this session. I'm from the Saraswati School of Science. Just any indication when you're ready is great. Thank you, Ms. President. Thank you. I don't believe I can see all the judges, so Ms. President, if you can tell me when they're all ready, that would be great.
Okay, they're all ready.
Perfect. Now, as a nation, we don't promise equal outcomes, but we were founded on the idea that everyone should have an equal opportunity to succeed. No matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from, you can make it. That's the essential promise that we make here in this Congress and America as a whole. Where you should start shouldn't determine where you end up. I want to make sure that that same promise is the one that we put for our citizens in the Northern Triangle. Make sure that they have the same livelihoods and the same guarantee to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we have, which is why I implore each and every one of you to pass this legislation. But first, let's start on the argument about gang recruitment that was championed by Mr. Siva earlier in today's debate. He said that on the negative, when we don't provide more aid to the Northern Triangle, we basically are not going to see any more gang recruitment happening in the area. However, Ms. Dileepkumar already says that this is not going to be true because we've seen through the USAID agency. However, the amendment we just passed by Mr. Rubas told us that we're going to have this congressional oversight over which NGOs are actually able to provide the aid. Not only meaning that, one, we're going to be actually seeing aid actually reach the Northern Triangle itself, but two, more oversight when it gets here. Here's exactly how this reduces crime. This is because it cripples gang recruitment. Section 1 of this piece of legislation gives $1 billion to the Northern Triangle for soft side development, which means they can grow their economy, better their schools, and train their military. All of these are going to actually make sure that we stop gang activity in the Triangle. La Prensa, a Honduran newspaper, in 2016 finds that Salvadorian and Hondurans pay an estimated $756 million and $200 million annually in extortion fees for organized crime groups. This means that when they actually have to go and take this aid that we provide through USAID, which is now oversought by what Mr. Rubas just passed in his amendment, we're actually seeing that there's more accountability and they have to listen to the gangs because of the fact that there's more of a risk of violence and people are poverty stricken, but because USAID and their cooperation with these new groups that we have under the congressional oversight is going to make sure that we lead to less gang recruitment and activity. But here's how passing is going to stop gangs from creating chaos in these regions. Eric Olson, a researcher at the Woodrow Wilson Center, in conjunction with the Department of State in November of 2018, finds that in the Northern Triangle, neighborhoods had received aid saw 18% less robberies, 50% fewer drug sales, and 50% fewer instances of extortion and blackmail, meaning that they were not recruited by these gangs at the end of the day. But not only that, the study furthers that U.S. aid to the Northern Triangle has led to 92 million exports, the creation of 290,000 jobs, and the cooperation of the government has resulted in the arrest of 3,800 gang members. Because we were able to create economic self-sufficiency, people don't have to suffer the injustices of gangs, meaning US aid plus our influence plus our congressional oversight means less recruitment and less crime. Because for children, no longer will they be passed down from generation to generation, and for giving termination and salvation. Understand that through this legislation, because of the oversight that we see that this Congress is going to pass and the aid that we provide, we're going to be seeing that we can cripple the gang recruitment that everyone wants to avoid.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, it will go to Senator Siva.
Hi, Representative. So in my speech, I said that gang recruitment is caused by overpopulation in prisons. So how is this legislation going to stop overpopulation in prisons in the first place?
Okay, that's not necessarily the only warrant as to why gang recruitment actually happens.
Exactly,
What
yeah,
happens is right now, once they receive that aid, gangs will tell these Salvadorans, Hondurans, Guatemalans, whatever country they are in the Northern Triangle is, hey, if you don't give us this aid that we just received from the US Aid Corporation, then you have to join our gang or you're going to get killed because they have to.
In the affirmative world, we aren't changing any of this.
Senator Pasquerella.
Okay, so where do a majority of the guns that are in Central America and in the Northern Triangle come from?
Why do guns matter? That's specifically not related to gang violence itself.
Where do the gangs get the guns?
I did not mention anything about guns. What I mentioned about is how gang recruitment is because of the fact that they literally just like take this aid from these Salvadorans, Hondurans, Guatemalans, all these people in the Northern Triangle who receive it and tell them if you don't give it to us, you're going to get killed by our
But
gang.
if gangs are able to get guns from the United States, then doesn't that mean that they're going to be able to create more violence?
That's not necessarily
Thank
true.
you.
And that's
Questioning period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was the speech in the affirmation, all negation speakers, please rise. That'll go to Senator Pasquerella. Oh, Senator Pasquerella.
Thank you. That's Senator Pasquerella, spelled Pasqueroa. I'm at the leisure of others above me, so just give me a quick thumbs up and I'll begin. Before I start, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. I don't know how many judges there are and I can't really see you all, so if anyone's just not ready, let me know. Cool. Throughout history, triangles seem to coincide with dark, gruesome events. The pyramids at Giza are a wonder of the ancient world, but they were built on the backs of slaves. The triangular trade brought economic prosperity to the Americas for centuries, but it only created a reliance on the slave trade. Understand that today, in the Northern Triangle, we have another problem going on. We have rampant violence, corruption, and political instability. And I understand that the affirmation attempts to paint the Northern Triangle in a more humanizing light. Well, let's look to the arguments that were made by both sides to understand why we must negate this legislation. Everything really boils down to two main categories, and that's corruption and illegal immigration that's related to violence. But first, let's talk about the point of corruption. Because the amendment that we just added to Section 3 takes care of the problems that would have been created by NGO and USAID corruption. But what does remain is the problem of government corruption in the Northern Triangle. Senators Nalluri and Dammalapati cite statistics from back in the Obama administration where government corruption was reduced because of our developmental aid. But look to Elizabeth Malkin, a journalist for the New York Times in April of 2019, who told us the only reason that we were able to reduce the government corruption back then was because the government was working directly in conjunction with the governments in the Northern Triangle. Understand that today, this legislation falls flat from achieving that goal. Look to Section 1 of this legislation, where it says we're going to work solely with NGOs. These NGOs are not allowed to cooperate with the governments in the Northern Triangle in the way that this legislation is worded. And so when Senator Rao, even on the negation, which is my side, tells us that the government is going to misuse the aid that we give them, understand that she's incorrect. This creates a worse perception of the government than what is actually going on. Because if you understand how this legislation really works, what is going to happen is that the government is going to have absolutely no access to this aid at all. And that's a problem because when the United States shines a light on the governments in the Northern Triangle by giving it aid and forcing it to be responsible for its actions, that's when the government becomes more accountable. That's when the government corruption stops. But second, let's look to the point of illegal immigration that is fueled by violence in the region. Because Senators Dammalapati, Nalluri, McAuliffe, and Gao all tell us that decreasing violence is, as a principle, going to decrease the illegal immigration. But Senator Siva contradicts this by telling us that this legislation does not decrease violence at all. In fact, it fuels gangs. But I'm going to take a step back from both sides and look to Robert Warren, an analyst for the Center of Migration Studies, who found that undocumented immigration fell by 2016 under the Obama administration. This was for a plethora of factors, but the major contributor to this was the Obama administration created more clear pathways to legal immigration and citizenship and had a less militarized border. Understand that violence does push people to have illegal immigration. And even if we're able to decrease that under this legislation, we might still see a spark of undocumented immigrants coming into this nation. Understand the risks that we have and negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That'll go to Senator Nalluri.
Hi, Senator. So you say the way we can reduce government corruption is by giving aid directly to these governments. But how does that make sense if the governments are corrupt? They're going to use that money for wrong purposes?
Okay, so it's not so much about giving the money to the governments, but it's about having them at least sitting down and discussing with us with their regional knowledge to decide what areas need the aid the most. We're not going to give them the money.
We are working our way up. We're working from the non-NGOs who want to help the people of the Northern Triangle, and from there we can interact with the government.
When we start to interact with the government, that's when we shine a light on their corruption, and we've seen in the past how that
Senator McAuliffe.
Okay, so you mentioned corruption in the past, right? Why is it bad if we're giving this to non-governmental organizations?
Okay, so when we give it to just non-governmental organizations, that means we're excluding the government from having any participation in this. What we saw in the past is when the Obama administration involved the government in the decisions with aid, we saw a decrease in corruption.
Yeah, but primarily wasn't that because in the ways that the Obama administration handled this? And why isn't that they can't just intervene now to work with these organizations?
Because there's nothing about that in this legislation. We're only going to have NGOs, there's no government organization.
Speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was the speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Again, I repeat, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Although the chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate, and if we have more than two speeches on the same side in a row, we will have to automatically move to previous question. Any negation speakers, please rise. Senator Perez, unopposed.
I thank the chair. I am Senator Perez, speaking for the first time this legislative session. I am at the leisure of all those above me. Please give me a sign, a signal, or anything once you are ready. The Northern Triangle needs our help. That is not in dispute. The question presented by this bill is whether the U.S. should help, and if so, by what means. U.S. assistance in Central America has decreased by nearly 30% from 2016 to 2019, and today, assistance to the Northern Triangle is only 0.035% of the current federal budget. To remedy that shortfall, this bill aspires to equip NGOs with the resources necessary to carry out their benevolent missions. But the proposal and awards process in Section 3A favors big companies over local organizations and does more for corporate profiting in the Northern Triangle than for stability in the Northern Triangle. I believe that we must invest in the Northern Triangle, but not by funneling money to corporations seeking to profit from the chaos. We should not delegate our foreign policy to third parties. We should ask the U.S. State Department with fighting corruption and rebuilding institutions in the Northern Triangle. The amendment adding Section 3B appears to address concerns over corruption of aid. Affirmative speakers have argued that oversight mechanisms can stop corruption, but oversight does not change Section 3A. Enforcement mechanisms like Section 3B don't matter if government awards go to big businesses who do not act corruptly. No amount of oversight is going to fix the fact that the procurement process tilts towards big business. NGOs is a misnomer. ExxonMobil, Facebook, and Google all have NGOs. They'd be more than happy to take taxpayer money. The factors for consideration, past performance, technical approach, personnel, corporate capability, and management plans will always tip the scales in favor of big corporations and will cut out grassroots, on the ground, organizations that create lasting change rather than exploiting them. Senators, despite the good intentions of the affirmation, the best route for potentially solving corrupt politics by empowering the public to vote corrupt leaders out of office that Senator Dileepkumar is worried about, and to push criminals out of control that most of the affirmation have claimed to be doing, is for the aid to be given directly to the citizens, not intermediary parties, not NGOs, not tilting the scale towards big companies. Negate this legislation because at the end of the day, it is the only way that we could stop the corruption and stop the harm continuing on. Save lives, negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 37 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Bole.
Okay, so you mentioned a few times about how when we negate, we like completely reduce corruption, but how is that?
We don't completely reduce corruption.
Okay, but how are we?
This legislation is an attempt to try and solve the situation, the crisis in
Okay, so the point of the legislation is to solve the issue, right? How is failing
once we negate this legislation, we reduce it a lot more significantly.
How are we negate?
Already been happening.
But when we negate, how are we solving the problems of the affirmation? Like, I'm just missing your point. Oh.
Thank you. Senator Rubas.
Hi, Mr. Perez. So I understand that corporations have NGOs, but when we as Congress literally can veto an NGO from getting this aid, how are they still ending up with the money?
Well, that's not the case. They have NGOs and they have all the will. They're free to continue and get those taxpayer money. This legislation enables them to do that. We aren't stopping them. There is no enforcement in any form, as they can let...
Okay, but that's just not true. Section 3B says that we have oversight over U.S. aid, meaning we can pick the agency.
Yeah, but no enforcement is going to stop that. No enforcement.
The question period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
Thank you. I thank the chair.
Senator Dileepkumar, you have a motion?
Yeah, I moved to previous question.
Seconds? All those in favor of moving to previous question? Assuming unanimous consent, we'll be now moving to voting on this bill. All those in affirmation, please put your placard to the screen and put them down when I say your name. Senator Nalluri, Senator Rubas, Senator McAuliffe, Senator Dammalapati, Senator Parsotan, and Senator Gao. All those in negation, please raise your placards. Senator Kumar, Senator Dileepkumar, Senator Bole, Senator Siva, Senator Perez, Senator Pasquerella, and Senator Rao. Any and all abstentions? There should be none. On a vote of 6-7, this bill does fail.
Motion?
Senator Dileepkumar, do you have a motion?
Seeing an ask for a break in debate, I move to a 5-minute recess.
Seconds? All those in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, so ordered. Meet back here in 5 minutes.
Okay, before everybody leaves, can we take a split? Yeah.
Okay. Raise your placard if you have an ask.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count 5.
Okay,
what about Meg? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, it's not too bad, but prep ask.
Roughly split, but yeah.
Good job, everyone, so far.
I'm gonna have fun with this next one.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the bill is actually Mr. Manohar's, so he will be very alert for the next set of speeches.
Also, it means that your facts better be good because I know this topic inside and out.
No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. Nishan, do you want to give the authorship?
No, I'm a judge.
I'll let you give the author. Would the entire room be okay with Nishan giving the author?
I'm a judge. We have a TD veto.
I have like...
John, no.
I'm deaf. I can't hear. Is everyone okay with Nishan giving?
He's deaf. Can you kick him off the judging committee?
As the parliamentarian, I have no wish to go deaf during Mr. Manohar's speech, so I will not be allowing him to give the authorship, because I'm fairly sure that is what will happen if we let him speak.
I'm not that loud. Not anymore.
What time is the
Salty
session supposed to end?
salty that gerrymandering didn't
Session
go up
ends around 4:50. Honestly, if the chamber wants to adjourn after 2 bills, I would have no objection.
No objection?
That is correct. No objection.
So kind of you.
Subtle hint there.
Miss Presiding Officer, are you keeping like track of questioning our speakers on like an Excel sheet or something like that?
Not on an Excel sheet, no.
Okay. At the end of the session, could you like, however you're keeping track, take a picture and like send it to me so that I can share it with the judges? Thank you.
Gracias.
Breaking news: Kim Jong-un apparently dead. I just got a New York Times article that said that.
Hasn't he died like 3 times over the past week? Apparently, I feel like
he's died 3 times. I found out during, I think it was Perez's speech. Josie, what are we ranking? Top 8 or top 6? What am I ranking?
Top 8.
Top 8.
And everyone else gets a 9.
Brooklyn 9-9.
Unless your name is Kumar.
I mean, considering there are 14 people in this chamber, it'll be Brooklyn 99999.
Oh my god.
Except, how many people here are in Brooklyn? Like 0, right?
What?
So it'll be random places across the United States. 99999.
No, but I'm from like Brooklyn. So like,
are you in Brooklyn?
No, I'm in Queens, but like it's close enough.
Jason, I accepted your follow request on Instagram. Just wanted to let you know.
Too close to the UN policy. First person who says it gets my 1.
how much time do we have left in the recess if our PO is still here?
50 seconds.
50 seconds. Okay, thank you. For the next bill, if you're going to try and link UNCLOS and coronavirus, it better be a damn good link. Okay?
No.
Thank you.
It could be any link. I want to hear it. I'm open to any argument.
No, it better be solid.
If I have all weekend, but I'm open to any argument.
If this UNCLOS speech is not, and it involves the coronavirus, it better be the best speech I've ever heard in my life.
I'm sorry for the faces that me and Meta have been making all session.
Okay, the recess time has elapsed. Is everyone here? I think we're missing some competitors.
We might also be missing some judges.
Wait till the judges get back and then get started.
Mr. Parliamentarian, could you do a judge count?
Yeah, I think we have all our judges but Miss Kubba, whose screen is on, but she's also not at her computer right now. So
we also aren't sure if Mr. Onteeru is here. If he's here, could you please let
Mr. Onteeru, if you are here, could you please give us a verbal signal?
Yeah, I've been here. We're good.
All right, cool.
Thank you, Mr. Onteeru.
So we're just waiting on Miss Kubba.
Yes. Okay, we have all our judges. We're good to go.
Should we wait for Senator McAuliffe if she's not here?
Recess is over. Go ahead.
Okay. Seeing as we finished debate on our last bill, we will be now moving to debate a resolution to ratify UNCLOS to validate claims to economic exclusion zones. Do we have a sponsor?
Seriously?
Real shocker.
Senator
Move to a 1-minute recess.
Sure.
Before we do, let me say it's absolutely unacceptable that you guys planned the whole docket and don't have a sponsor for the second piece of legislation.
What is the first affirmative?
We're not in recess yet. You guys still have to like have the PO declare recess, so please don't start talking over each other until that actually happens. So you can now vote on the motion to recess or not.
Is there a second? All those in favor, assuming unanimous consent, 1 minute recess.
5 people raised their placards to say that they had an affirmation on this. Why aren't any of them sponsoring?
Or just giving like a just give like a first half. Like,
Yeah, just give a first half.
Give a first half.
We have a sponsor. Mr. McAuliffe wants a sponsor. I think we're done.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. McAuliffe, the floor is yours.
Awesome. And as always, I can't see everyone, so just give me an indication when you're ready. As always, yeah. What was that?
Nishan, can you mute my mic for me? My computer's froze. I've had so many internet problems all day.
It happens.
I'm so
And this is Katie McAuliffe. I'm an independent. So ready?
He can't be muted. This is weird.
Good. If you have ever driven a car, taken a train, or even flown a plane, chances are you have used some oil from the Strait of Hormuz. The issue with this legislation is that when the United States has not ratified the UN clause, we see an issue with how the enforcement mechanism is taking place when we look at oil, with which all of us have used at some point. So when we realize why we must pass this legislation by first focusing on what this legislation and what the UN Law of the Sea does, and secondly, realizing the impact we pass. So first, let's focus on what this legislation actually does. So for this, I turn to Section 34 of the UN Law of the Sea, which states that the passage through straits used by international navigation established in part by shall not in other respects affect the legal status of the waters forming such straits or the exercise by the states bordering the straits of their sovereignty or jurisdiction under the water, air, space, bed, and subsoil. So what this means is that countries cannot shut the rest of international travel out of a specific strait. This is mostly in regards to what happened with Iran just earlier this year, where they ended up shutting down the Strait of Hormuz because of tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Because of this 21-mile strait, which produces 20% of the world's oil, this is in regards to Time Magazine in 2020, where 20% of the U.S. oil supply flows through. Now, what this legislation does in result of that, for this, I turn to the resolve section, which states that the U.S. government should, upon ratification, oversee diplomatic and military efforts to enforce all claims on economic exclusion zones. But secondly, let's look at the impact of this. What does the United States actually have to do? Now, this is where I turn to the Time Magazine from a journalist in 2020, which explains that 20% of the global oil supply flows through the strait, which links the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. And though it is technically regulated by the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, it has not been able to enforce because of Iran wanting to shut down the strait. Now, this is absolutely detrimental to U.S. power and U.S. influence because 20% of international oil flows out of the strait. If we are going to see in a time specifically of economic chaos, we must guarantee that this oil can make it. Now, let's look at what the United States is obligated to do, and that is through diplomatic and military efforts. Well, first, before speakers on the negation inevitably mention that we cannot intervene militarily, we must turn to the fact that diplomatic efforts must be used as a first response. Now, because of this, when we look at what the UN Law of the Sea does, which is essentially guaranteeing these economic exclusion zones can be used and protected by countries, we realize we must vote in the affirmation. All of our lives revolve around this type of oil. All of our lives revolve around these economic exclusion zones in one way or another. When we pass, we guarantee their safety. Affirm.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 1 second. All questioners, please rise. Of those standing, it'll go to Senator Dammalapati.
So, hi, Senator. Would the United States be harmed by passing today's legislation in any way?
Well, once again, the biggest harm that I could think of is the military efforts that could happen.
So, would there be no harm to the American economy?
Well, once again, this is protecting exclusion zones. So if anything, would help the American economy by helping our trade, specifically in the Arctic, which I wasn't able to mention in my speech.
But actually, the law of the sea says that every time a company wants to explore the sea there, they must pay $250,000. So wouldn't this be unachievable? And wouldn't this be harmful?
Okay. Is there a certain Vladimir Putin who really likes patrolling in the Arctic?
What was that?
Russia really likes patrolling in the Arctic, right?
Sure.
Okay, so what we passed today's legislation, we're increasing tensions with them, correct?
Well, what we're doing is we're going to guarantee these economic exclusion
Okay,
zones.
I wasn't talking about EEZs at all. I was saying that we're going to be increasing tensions, correct? Because we're patrolling in the same waters as Russia, which is more tense, right?
Sure.
Which is bad for the United States, of course, because we don't like tension.
I don't see the question there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Senator
'cause-
Parsotan?
Sorry, I was turning my mic on. Hi, Ms. McAuliffe. What exactly does today's bill do? There's like two things it does, right? It does one, ratifies UNCLOS, and two, it establishes the EEZs, which is like the main crux of your argument. But are there any negative benefits of UNCLOS itself that we have to recognize before passing this bill?
Well, once again, when we look at any enforcement mechanism of any UN treaty, obviously there are going to be those issues.
Like, I agree with that, but are there things that would like prevent like more like, you know, beneficial and like expedient foreign policy from like happening in UNCLOS?
Thank you. Senator Dileepkumar?
Hi, Senator. So exactly how many UN member states have signed on to UNCLOS already?
I believe it's over 100. However, I do not have that number on me.
Yeah, it's 164. If 164 countries can't enforce UNCLOS in the Strait of Hormuz, how does adding one more make that big a difference?
Okay, because with the United States is not only military power, but also diplomatic pressure, even if it does, it will make a difference because of having that added pressure from the international.
But don't 164 countries also have diplomatic pressure and military power that they can enforce?
Thank you. Question time has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negative speakers, please rise. That'll go to Senator Dammalapati.
Point of order?
Yes, Senator Nalluri. Oh, sorry. That will go to Senator Nalluri.
I rescind the floor.
Once again, my name is Senator Nalluri, Nalluri, for the judges and for the parliamentarian. I am speaking in the negation, and I'm registered as an independent. Please give me a smile or nod when you're ready. Are any of the judges not ready for the parliamentarian? Okay, awesome. The UN Convention of the Law of the Sea was created as a means to protect nations' rights on certain parts of the sea. And Senator McAuliffe today argues that by passing today's legislation, the United States will get that same protection and sovereignty. But in reality, the US ends up losing more from this convention than it ends up gaining, which is why ultimately we must stand in the negation of today's legislation because one, it hinders our national sovereignty and depletes our resources, and two, because the convention is ineffective at enforcing its rules. According to senior research fellows Theodore Brumman, James Carfano, and Brett Schaefer of the Heritage Organization, in June of 2018, for over 30 years through domestic laws and bilateral agreements, the United States has established a legal framework for deep seabed mining. But if the United States decides to ratify the convention today, all of this would be ignored, and instead the US would be forced to pay excessive fees to the International Seabed Authority. But the problem doesn't end there. The ISA gives itself the right to redistribute all the minerals the United States spends its money and resources mining. And the ISA in itself is a poorly managed organization. According to Will Hilton of The Atlantic in February of 2020, unlike most UN bodies, the ISA receives little oversight. It is classified as autonomous and falls under the full direction of its own Secretary General. So what Senator McAuliffe fails to understand today is that by passing today's legislation, we are actually depleting the resources that we are using to deep sea mine by giving up our minerals to a poorly run authority, which is also hindering our national sovereignty as a nation by letting the ISA take away our power. Now, we must also stand in the negation of today's legislation because this convention is ineffective at enforcing its rules. Now, to understand this, we have to understand the crisis currently in place at the South China Sea. As journalist Hannah Beach of the New York Times explains, in September of 2018, China has given itself the rights to the South China Sea, even though the waters it claims belongs to other countries under the UN agreement. China has completely ignored all of the convention despite a tribunal ruling against the nation's claims. All this proves is that the United Nations cannot enforce its rules where and when it is most needed, so it does not benefit any of the countries that are currently in the agreement. The convention in itself is ineffective. Now, Senator McAuliffe spends her whole speech talking about a lot of the issues related with oil and today's agreement. But according to senior research fellow Stephen Groves, in May of 2012, the U.S. has secured title to oil and gas resources located on its extended continental shelf. But if we pass today's legislation, it'll have to transfer a lot of these resources back to the ISA to redistribute. So essentially, we are receiving a net harm in terms of our oil resources. We see that the United States is already following the convention, and it can best protect its resources and its assets by not ratifying UNCLOS today. Now, by joining today's agreement, we are not gaining anything we already have. We only lose our sovereignty and our resources. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Kumar.
Okay, so what is current ISA deep sea bed mining regulation?
So basically what happens is whatever the U.S. ends up mining has to go back to the ISA and they get to redistribute those minerals.
Yes, however, that is completely false. ISA does not have laid out deep sea mining regulations. So what is the real effect of this legislation?
The ISA gives itself the authority to redistribute minerals.
No, the ISA does not have deep sea mining regulation. We are enabling unpredictability, right?
So what is your argument?
Thank you. Senator Siva?
Hi, Senator. Are you saying that in the status quo, we are losing a lot more of our national sovereignty than we're losing less national sovereignty than we ever will in the affirmative world?
Yes, by passing today's legislation, we are going to actually lose our national sovereignty, as opposed to if we did pass today's legislation, we wouldn't be gaining as much.
In the affirmative, in the status quo right now, we're seeing China and Russia and multiple countries taking advantage of our national sovereignty completely. Isn't joining UNCLOS the only solution to make sure?
As I have proved in my speech, this convention is not good at its enforcement.
Thank you, Senator
UNCLOS.
Okay, so focus on your point about oil, right? You cited a source from 2012. Recently, I mentioned in my speech that Iran actually tried to close that strait earlier this year. So how does that point still stand?
Well, currently under UNCLOS, because all of that oil was from the extended continental shelf and the U.S. did have its title to it, if we end up ratifying UNCLOS, we will lose our resources.
Why?
Because the UNCLOS gives itself the right to redistribute those resources.
Where does it say that? What exact article?
I do not have the article.
Is there another question? Senator McAuliffe again.
So let's go back to that point. Where is it given the right to redistribute material? Because I personally cannot find it anywhere within the treaty.
Well, I do not know I do not know which article on the top of my head, but I do know that the International Seabed Authority does give itself the right to redistribute minerals.
Okay, and the previous speaker just mentioned that they didn't have anything with deep sea mining. So how does that point stand?
Who has anything with deep sea mining?
That's what the previous speaker just said, that the ISA does not control anything with deep sea mining. Where does it specifically say that in this treaty or in their regulations?
The question period has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. From those standing, it will go to Senator Siva.
I thank the chair. I'm Representative Siva, spelled S-I-V-A. I'm an independent. Please let me know when you're ready, and I'll be happy to begin. And as always, I think there were like 9 judges, so Ms. President, please let me know when everyone's ready. Thank you. Okay, thank you. As we glaze past the remaining ice near the North Pole, we forget that we're not the only nation in the entire world. As more and more countries encroach upon our national sovereignty, we do nothing but stay still. To prevent this inaction, it's time we pass the legislation. So first, Representative McAuliffe already said in her legislation and in her speech that it protects our rights in the Strait of Hormuz. But let me go one step further in saying that it protects our rights in the Arctic, something that Representative Nalluri champions against. According to the CFR report, in March 22nd of 2017, Russia has the longest Arctic coastline and derives 95% of its natural gas and 75% of its oil from the Arctic territories. And this number is only continuously rising as ice in that area continuously melt. In the past year alone, Russia has made claims to an extended shelf that belongs to us in the first place. In the past 6 months, Russia has built ports along its Arctic coastline and continuously increases its presence in the region. It has expanded its claims to United States exclusive economic zones, and we can't do anything about it because we have no claims to our own EEZs. And because we have minimal US presence in the area, we're only making sure other countries like Russia and China only take advantage of our efforts to mitigate this entire situation. And as Representative McAuliffe said in her speech, the only way to stop other countries from taking advantage of our role in this international agreement is to pass UNCLOS completely and to increase our presence in the entire Arctic. In many places like the South China Sea and the Arctic region, countries like China and Russia continuously threaten that 200-mile zone, and the United States can't do anything about it because we haven't passed UNCLOS as of yet. If we haven't passed UNCLOS, we can't argue with other countries about EEZs because we haven't agreed to any of this legislation says in the first place. Senator Bole, in questioning, says that it harms the U.S. foreign policy when patrolling their areas. But he is saying that in the status quo, we will rather let other countries take advantage of our national sovereignty than continuously doing so. Senator Nalluri creates the bold point that it takes advantage of our national sovereignty. But actually, according to the March 15, 2015 Harvard Law School report, it actually does not do anything like that. In the status quo right now, we're losing so much of our national sovereignty in the Arctic and the South China Sea. And in the Arctic especially, Russia continuously increases its EEZs in the area and doesn't continuously comes into our EEZs in the first place. And because we haven't passed the legislation, we don't have any control of this completely. Representative Nalluri goes on to saying that it's only going to harm us in the end. But UNCLOS is an international agreement, giving us the right to patrol our own borders. And even if she comes with the false proclamation that UNCLOS switches up our own resources, it's time we realize that the alternative is better than the actual status quo. Because in the affirmative world, we're protecting our constituents and protecting our resources. Because in the Alaskan region, we have about 44% of our own population. 44% of the entire Arctic region belongs to the United States. Well, less than 3% is Russian entire area. To even have a voice in the Arctic, it's time we pass the legislation and represent our interests. Pass.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Kumar.
Okay, so you state that we won't lose national sovereignty. Can you explain that?
Okay, so basically in the status quo, countries like Russia and China are increasingly encroaching other people's national sovereignty. And Senator Nalluri says in her speech that this entire thing is not true, but I proved it.
Okay, Senator. However,
Yes,
with the current climate change, with the high climate change regulations of UNCLOS, won't we lose national sovereignty?
No, actually, completely not, because we hold a majority of the Arctic resources, and if we pass legislation, we're going to protect
Senator Perez.
So with that 40% in the Arctic, are we drilling there? Are we doing anything there?
Can you elaborate? I don't understand.
We don't have any sovereignty over that land, and we have to put it back, right?
I'm saying the United States has much more of our population in the Arctic region than Russia has. And considering this scenario, Russia still has taken advantage of our resources.
Then what will we do there? Then what are we doing there right now?
We're extracting our own minerals and supplies. Russia is taking advantage of our EEZ.
Why can't we do that?
Question time is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
I thank the chair.
Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation.
Before we move on to the next speech, quick announcement for the chamber. Even though this is an online tournament, you're still expected to maintain decorum, right? So that means you should not be practicing your speech while someone else is speaking. If you want to do that, then make a point of personal privilege and exit chamber. But otherwise, if you wouldn't be doing it in a real physical chamber, you shouldn't be doing it here either. It's disrespectful to the speaker.
Thank you. All negation speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator Rao. Sorry, Senator Dammalapati, I didn't see yours.
I rescind the floor.
I thank the chair. Good morning, good afternoon, senators. I'm Senator Dammalapati speaking for the second time this legislative session. I begin at the leash of all those above me, so please give me a nod or a smile when you're ready. Is someone not ready? Okay. As President Ronald Reagan once said, no national interest of the United States can justify handing over 2/3 of the earth over to the third world. Today, fellow Congress members, we must stand and negate today's legislation because 1, the expenses related to ratifying the UNCLOS, and 2, because it limits American control. But first, let's negate because of the expenses. Ratifying this treaty would be extremely detrimental to the U.S.'s capitalistic endeavors, environmental controls, security, and our freedom. Although Senator McAuliffe claims that no harm will be done to the American economy during cross-examination, let's see where her argument falls flat for several reasons. According to the Council on Foreign Relations on January 10, 2020, if we pass today's bill, American taxpayers are responsible for paying 25% of the International Seabed Authority's budget. Contractors would be levied taxes termed application fees of $1 million annually. Also, every time a company would like to explore the sea, they must pay $250,000. Acceding to the UNCLOS would also expose the United States to lawsuits on virtually any maritime activity, such as the alleged pollution of marine environments. Regardless of the merits, the United States would be forced to defend itself against every lawsuit at a great expense to taxpayers. Any climate change lawsuit that imposes penalties would be extremely costly for American consumers. Any type of emission control measures would increase costs for businesses and then pass those costs again onto consumers. To make matters worse, adverse judgments would be final, not subject to an appeal or enforceable in the United States. We must understand that this legislation is the classic case of the intent is good, but the consequences and the repercussions are harmful. In the end, we need to make sure that whatever Congress is doing, it won't impact the American society and the economy in a harmful way. But second, let's negate today's legislation, because by passing today's legislation, it's only going to limit American control. Because according to the Heritage Foundation on June 4, 2019, U.S. membership in this convention would not confer any maritime right or freedom that the United States does not already enjoy. The United States can best protect its rights by maintaining a strong U.S. Navy and presence over our oceans, not by acceding to this agreement. The UN Treaty also requires the United States to share information and technology with other countries. In addition, the treaty would allow seabed authorities, or 161 nations, full jurisdiction of all coastal waters up 10 to 12 miles from our coastal shores. The United States has been able to maintain its control and does not need help. The United States has successfully protected its interests in the Arctic region for more than 30 years since the beginning of the convention. As a sovereign nation, the United States can and has secured titles to oil and gas resources located on the continental shelf. So contrary to Senator Siva's claim, we don't need support from the law of the seas or UNCLOS. The U.S. powers will only be restricted and limited if we pass, because we have no reason to support legislation that will only cause detrimental harm to the United States in the short term and the long run. So we must negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Rubas.
Hi, Senator. So what are the environmental risks of deep sea mining?
Well, marine pollution, etc. There are a list of. I'm sure you can enlighten me.
Okay, right. So we can harm tons of biodiversity. We just don't know a whole lot about the topic. So doesn't it make sense to have an agency toughly scrutinizing companies before they start mining?
Well, the problem with this is because any lawsuits can be gained from such maritime or pollution lawsuits, and this can lead to detrimental economic effects on the companies. And we can avoid this because
why is it a bad thing for companies to be sued for polluting the ocean?
How have we protected our sovereignty when Russia and China are clearly abusing it through EEZs?
Well, what I'm arguing is that the United States has been able to sustain its control on Arctic oil and gas resources, and because of that, we don't need to pass this legislation because we already have control and we're already securing our resources.
Why can't we pass this legislation to further acknowledge that we have control of our resources?
Because it will only be a waste of an unnecessary time and effort, because as my entire first point surrounds, it's only an economic harm by passing today's legislation.
Questioning time has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise.
I have a motion.
Senator Parsotan, state that.
I wanted to make a motion for a point of personal privilege to address the chamber really quickly to find out about the split. Thus far in the debate.
Granted.
Okay, so like a 1 minute in-house recess.
Okay, in-house recess. Okay.
Yeah.
A second. All those in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, so granted. 1 minute recess.
Okay, cool. Can you just raise your placard and like if you're aft?
Yeah, I flipped.
Okay, so Ms. President, correct me if I'm wrong. I see 4. 4, okay. And then if you're neg, raise your placard. Okay, also 4. Okay, so it's like even now then. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Just noting, that'll probably bring us to the end of the session. So.
Okay, recess time has elapsed. Seeing as the last speech was a negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. From those standing, that goes to Senator Rubas.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Representative Joey Rubas, spelled R-U-B-A-S, speaking for the second time here. I'm from Naperville Central High School. I'll wait a minute and then we'll see if anyone's not ready. Okay, so is anyone's not ready? No one? Good? Okay, we'll get started. We can debate about oil and geopolitics all day long, but the single most important impact in our debate is the one that can't be undone, the environmental impact. So today, what we have to do is look at the environmental regulations put in place by UNCLOS and understand that when we affirm this legislation, we're ensuring a stronger future for our environment. Now, first, let's address the claims by Ms. Nalluri and Ms. Dammalapati about deep sea mining. Now, both of you told us that when we pass this legislation, we're getting rid of our own legal framework and giving it away to the ISA. And that's a bad thing because it's tough for our companies to get these deep seabed mining licenses. But what both of you misunderstand is that in switching to the UNCLOS system, we're protecting our environment. And this is because, as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature tells us in July of 2019, as deep sea mining remains understudied and poorly understood, there are many gaps in our understanding of its effects on our biodiversity and ecosystem. This makes it very difficult for companies to thoroughly assess the potential impacts of deep sea mining and put in place adequate safeguards to protect the marine environment. And as a result, with our current knowledge, if these companies aren't highly scrutinized, they can have large impacts on our biodiversity and ecosystems. However, when we ratify UNCLOS, that changes because as the Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, Michael Lodge tells us on April 2nd of 2019, under UNCLOS, companies are only allowed to do deep sea mining when they have a contract with the International Seabed Authority, a contract which requires scrutiny by the authority to make sure that they're not going to be taking environmentally bad action. So when we ratify UNCLOS, we make sure that these horrible environmental impacts aren't happening. So Ms. Nalluri and Ms. Dammalapati, when you tell us that today's legislation is going to put deep sea mining at risk, understand I'd rather put that industry at risk than our entire environment. But on that same note, let's focus in on the general environmental regulations put in by UNCLOS. Now, as journalist Lisa Gross tells us on Vox on May 30th of 2016, right now the United States has inadequate environmental regulations when it comes to the sea, which led to the 2010 oil spill, which put nearly 5 billion barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. And what this means is that the environment in that region was strongly hurt. However, UNCLOS changes that. Because as UNCLOS Article 145 says, it outlines preventing pollution and protecting biodiversity in such a way that oil spills like this, the risk would be significantly reduced, if not eliminated altogether. So, Mr. Kumar, when you tell us that we're losing some sovereignty by ratifying UNCLOS when it comes to our environmental regulation, yes, that's true, but when we're saving our environment, that's something I'm willing to stand for. Pass today's legislation to save our biodiversity and save our environment.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds exactly. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Bole.
Okay, so you mentioned all of these environmental impacts, right? But do those environmental impacts actually measure up to the fact that we're going to be putting ourselves in a much worse geopolitical place when we pass?
Look, geopolitics can be handled in tons of different ways,
and
environmental
policy.
isn't necessarily going to be the biggest.
Okay, so
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Can't we just pass environmental policy in this Congress, all while advancing our geopolitical standard by not
Well, it's kind of a double impact, because when we join UNCLOS, we can also make sure that it's better enforced.
Legislation.
Representative, can you explain to me exactly how UNCLOS is stopping like all these environmental issues from happening, specifically protecting marine life?
So if you read section 145, it outlines a ton of very specific protections. We don't have time for that, but I'm sure you can read
So
it.
saying that UNCLOS is protecting marine life, does that stop oil companies from going in there and transporting and producing oil outside of it?
Okay, so it doesn't stop them from doing it, but it means they're going to have to do it in a way that's more environmental.
UNCLOS allows us to get oil?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Isn't everyone else on
the questioning period is elapsed? The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negative speakers, please rise. Oh, Senator Rao, do you have a motion?
No.
Oh, all negative speakers, please rise. From those standing, that goes to Senator Rao.
I thank the chair. That is Rao, spelled R-A-O, speaking for the second time in this legislative session. I am from an independent school, so as always, I stand at leisure of my superiors. Could Miss President give me just a thumbs up when everyone is ready? Thank you. On January 23rd, 2020, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved our doomsday clock to 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. I'm telling you this because the impact of this debate is not 5 years from now, 5 days, or even 5 minutes from now. It's right now. Don't incite Armageddon. Don't vote in the affirmation. So I want to talk about the two things that this debate has been focused around: U.S. sovereignty and the environment. Now, when it comes to U.S. sovereignty, people on the affirmation believe that UNCLOS will allow us to maintain this U.S. sovereignty, while in the negation, they think the exact opposite is going to happen. I'm going to tell you why this point falls to the negation. The National Geographic in March 2016 from multiple environmental reporters tell us that major companies like Shell and Exxon are already making aggressive moves to usher in a new oil rush in the Arctic Ocean. In some places, it's already begun. Russia and oil giants like Gazprom has already begun producing small amounts of oil in the Arctic, in the ocean north of Russia. We aren't falling behind two other companies, representatives. We are neck and neck right now in oil production. And though I do believe that mining and drilling oil will push us further ahead, let me tell you why this is extremely detrimental in the status quo. According to Paul Kelly in the U.S. Naval Academy, if we accede, the United States must ratify the convention for its claim to be internationally recognized, meaning that no companies would face any international backlashes. You and I both know that big companies are very greedy, and under UNCLOS, they cannot be held accountable like we want them to. Here is why we cannot let any drilling to continue anywhere in the future. I'm really glad that Representative Rubas brought up the environment, because this point wholly falls to the negation. There are two impacts to the environment. Representative Nalluri only seems to think that it's deep sea mining that impacts our environment. But Representative Rubas says that UNCLOS is protecting our drilling because there's not going to be any oil spills because of UNCLOS. But simply saying that there aren't going to be oil spills isn't actually going to prevent oil spills. In fact, the U.S. Department of Interior in 2019 told us that because of fragile Arctic ice and tricky weather conditions, oil spills in that region are 75% more likely to happen. And I'm sorry to break it to you, Representative Rubas, but oil spills kill marine life too. But the second and most major impact of this debate is global warming. American Progress in November 2019 from a senior policy analysis says that out of the oil that isn't spilled in the ocean, 4.3 billion metric tons of CO2 will be released into our environment. We already know the detrimental effects of global warming, but I just want to quantify them in human bodies. CNN in 2016 claims that 150,000 deaths occur each year because of weather condition. And WHO in February 2018 continues that this number will be increased to 1/3 of a million people because of everything involved. That is not something that our Congress should support. This is not dramatic. This is a reality. We are causing the apocalypse by passing today. And you and I both know the right thing to do. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Rubas.
Okay, so how is putting in place a significant amount of regulation on oil drilling going to cause more spills?
So regulation on oil drilling doesn't prevent oil drilling from happening. I'm saying if companies go up there and drill in the first place, they are 75% more likely to cause an oil spill.
Okay, so I'm not talking about whether the drilling is happening in the first place. I'm talking about specific practices companies can take to prevent the spills. If we put those in place, aren't they less likely?
Practices, if you're 75% more likely, they should be practicing this stuff already. And guess what? Oil spills.
Thank you, Senator Pasquerella.
Hi, so if we're going to enter like some kind of new oil rush by investing in like shipping into the Arctic, you say that there's going to have a more adverse economic and environmental effect, right?
It's going to have a major environmental effect, yes.
Okay, right. But shipping routes in the Arctic are shorter, meaning that they probably release less carbon dioxide into the environment. Is that correct?
Representative, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying there's a 75% more likely chance of oil spills to occur, and 4.3 billion metric tons of CO2 will be released from the oil in the Arctic right now.
The question carries last. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator Dileepkumar.
I thank the chair. I know there are a lot of judges, that Senator Dileepkumar. I'm registered as an independent. I'm just going to ask if anybody is not ready, let me know. Other than for that, I'll just start.
I'm not ready. Give me a minute just to finish up the last person's ballot. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead on my part. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Pio, ready? Perfect. All too often, this Congress puts politics over policy. Pass today's policy because it's time that this Congress finally takes advantage of the seas because we can't afford to keep drowning. Now, the first reason why you affirm today's legislation is because we're finally able to protect our fiber optic cables in economic exclusion zones. Representative Dammalapati comes up here and says that we don't get new maritime rights if we implement today's legislation. That's categorically false. We're securing our resources by passing today's legislation. Tara Davenport of Yale Law explains in a December 2015 report that submarine cables are applicable under UN UNCLOS regulations for economic exclusion zones. Other countries can't lay cables in our EEZs if we pass this treaty. But there's no enforcement mechanism in the status quo, and that's exactly why companies from Russia and China are competing with American companies to lay cables in our EEZs. But there's a very serious and very dangerous impact to that reality. NOAA explains in their report on February 4, 2020, along with a UNEP report in 2009, that deep sea fiber optic cables account for 95% of all the internet traffic in the entire world. That's a serious threat. When China and Russia are competing for 95% of all of the internet traffic, we have to make sure that our economic exclusion zones are protected from this reality. The most important impact in today's round is national security. I'm going to place a burden on every single negation speaker who comes up after me. Prove to me that your impact is more important than having access to 95% of the internet. None of them can do that, which is why your vote belongs with the affirmation. But second, let's understand exactly why today's debate has focused around the question, what natural resources do we really gain if we pass today's bill? Now first, Senator Dammalapati and Senator Nalluri say that we already have all the resources that we need in the Arctic without passing UNCLOS. And let's take them at their highest ground and pretend this is right, even though it's not. Let's get all the resources that we need from the Arctic. That's not enough. The reality is what we're doing is making sure that other countries don't infringe in our EEZs and we protect our sovereignty as a result. Senator McAuliffe and Senator Siva on the affirmation both explained that keeping other countries from infringing in our EEZs is the fundamental point of passing today's legislation. When 44% of the Arctic is U.S. economic exclusion zones, we have to understand that that's more important than anything else. The impact is that Russia's economy is fundamentally dependent on oil. Take away that, and we finally ensure that we have the upper hand when it comes to any sanctions and any economic leverage. It's time that this Congress finally understands the importance of smart policy. Today's legislation is the life raft we need on the high seas. Affirm, because it's time that we protect our constituents.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. All questioners, please rise. That will go to Senator Perez.
Hi, Senator. You mentioned that through fiber optic cables, we would have the ability to access 95% of the internet, right?
Yes.
Who currently then owns the internet?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying 95% of the internet flows through fiber optic cables. What's happening right now is that Russia and China are competing with American companies in our EEVs for those cables.
Who laid down those fiber optic cables?
American companies, Russian companies, and Chinese companies. Today's legislation ensures it's only American companies.
That's the case. We have control of most of them there.
Thank you. Senator Kumar?
Okay, so would you propose the idea of access to technology is a bigger impact than access to the internet?
Sure. The idea of access to technology is very important, right? But all that technology is relatively not useful if we don't have access to the internet. The issue isn't access to the internet. The issue is American companies providing that access.
Okay, so how are we going to have access to technology if we accede to UNCLOS and won't mine as these sea minerals such as cobalt and nickel that give us this technology?
We already have access to those in the status quo. Today's legislation gives us more access.
The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, all negative speakers, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Kumar.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Kumar speaking for the second time today. I do not represent a school. And just give me any indication if you're not ready.
Point of personal privilege.
State that.
Permission to exit the chamber.
Granted.
Thank you.
Semper Fortis, the Navy code for always strong. Our Navy is considered to be the most powerful force in the world. The threat to our waters is absent, and so should this bill. Negate today because we will face unpredictability regarding our deep sea mining, and because by joining UNCLOS, we will face climate change lawsuits from their current members. But now to my first point, that we will face unpredictability regarding our deep sea mining. Representative Nalluri touches on this. However, she doesn't acknowledge the real issue. According to The Economist, on August 16, 2019, the International Seaboard Authority, a part of UNCLOS, does not have deep sea bed mining regulations. By passing today's bill, we enable unreliability, and this threatens these minerals. This is seen by how ISA does not have laid out deep sea mining regulations, Representative Nalluri. Currently, as not a part of ISA, our American companies flourish on our own regulations that we know will be just and that we are used to, which makes our deep sea mining companies much more efficient. However, we don't know what will happen if we accede to UNCLOS. We won't know if our companies will be heavily restricted or any other effects. And this is important because of this bill's unreliability for deep sea minerals, which is a larger issue than what Representative Dileepkumar tells you. Because as seen in an article by Mary Gallagher of MIT on December 5th, 2019, the deep sea minerals such as cobalt and nickel prove crucial to the manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries. By passing today's bill, we put our tech at risk with ISA laws. These lithium-ion batteries are used to make our smartphones and other technology. We cannot threaten our future with technology over unpredictability with no stated regulation of deep sea mining. But now to my second point, that if by joining UNCLOS, we will face climate change lawsuits from their current members. Representative Siva fails to realize how national sovereignty is being taken away by this, and Representative Rubas says we will be improving our environmental safety. However, this actually poses an issue, as seen in an article by Theodore Bromond of the Heritage Foundation on June 4th, 2018. We will face numerous climate change lawsuits if we accede to the convention. By joining UNCLOS, we are increasing our number of lawsuits for no reason, because ISA upholds a very high regulation of air quality around the world. Our air is very clean. However, it still doesn't meet ISA regulations. And this is seen in an article by Nadia Popovich of the New York Times on June 19th, 2019, where America's environment has gotten much cleaner. By passing today's bill, we are losing our sovereignty for no reason. We have to unnecessarily uphold the ISA regulation. When our air quality is much cleaner than other nations and doesn't cause issues for our constituents, we should negate. We are changing the world with technology. However, by passing this bill, our country is placed under unnecessary pressure, and the tech of the future will be the tech of the trash can.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, it will go to Senator Dileepkumar.
Thank you. So when was UNCLOS passed by the UN?
Why don't you tell me?
It's 1982. Doesn't that give American companies 38 years to figure out these regulations and account for them?
Yes, however, it's unpredictability with deep sea mining, okay? Our current companies are used to our regulations.
But where's the unpredictability? You're either in our EEZs or you're not in our EEZs.
I'm talking about deep sea mining. There is no regulation by the ISA.
That's what the law of the high seas does. It specifically regulates that.
No, it doesn't. There is no.
Hi, Mr. Kumar. I literally read you ISA regulation on deep sea mining in my speech. How are you claiming there's no regulation?
Because, okay, what I'm saying is it enables unpredictability. There is no current regulation on mining these deep sea minerals.
Current regulation in my speech. How can you claim there's no regulation?
What was the regulation that you proposed?
So I told you that all of these companies need to get these licenses from the ISA and need to be like scrutinized on their environmental protection.
I'm talking about regulation for getting these resources, not a license.
The questioning period is last. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Gao.
Point of personal privilege.
State that.
Permission to enter the chamber.
Granted.
This is Representative Gao, last name spelled G-A-O. This is my second time speaking this session, and PO, just give me a thumbs up when everybody is ready. Is everybody ready? Okay. When it comes to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, the United States is like an uninvited party member, missing out on all the fun and benefits. Of course, there's always a sense of danger. Someone might poison our drinks. Someone might bring a bomb. The thing is, that's a might. For this reason, representatives, we need to affirm today's legislation because A, it helps our national sovereignty, and B, it benefits our economy and constituents. Let me clear up one point. National sovereignty. Senator Parsotan, Kumar, Dammalapati, Rao, and Nalluri say that ratifying UNCLOS doesn't do anything to help with our sovereignty because it limits our power and doesn't help the South China Sea situation at all. However, this is actually false. According to a James Kroska, an international law expert in the U.S. Naval War College in 2016, the irony is that the United States already scrupulously follows the rules in the convention. So in reality, by ratifying, we allow for an increase of already existing power by forcing other nations to acknowledge our presence at a global level without having to majorly change any current regulations, which is what the negation fails to realize. Additionally, Kroska says the U.S. has more to gain by formally joining the UNCLOS, including a more stable legal framework for accessing resources on the extended continental shelf of the U.S. Joining the treaty would give the U.S. more credibility, which is what we need right now. Basically, it would be a step in the right direction of the South China Sea conflict. In the case of this looming present matter, some step is better than none. We have nothing to lose. The negation says that in the short term, we decrease our power, but we prove that in the long term, we actually increase our current power at an international level. Our impact is far greater and we need to negate. Now, let's talk about our constituents. Let's understand why it is so imperative that we pass today's legislation to not only help America as a whole, but each and every one of our fellow Americans, unlike what Senator Dammalapati said in her speech. According to a March 1st, 2016 National Ocean Economics Program article, in 2010, the ocean economy employed about 2.8 million people and produced 258 billion worth of goods and services. But according to NOEP, an additional 2.6 million jobs and 370 billion were indirectly associated with ocean industries. As we can see, the U.S. already has a pretty big involvement in the sea economy. So ratifying is necessary for the future of our economy. Also, it is expected by an OECD article written in 2016 that the gross value of ocean-based industries could double by 2030, reaching around $3 trillion. That's why it is imperative that we need to ratify today's legislation. By ratifying, we ensure that the the growth of our economy and our nation as a whole. Let's get an invitation to that party that we were uninvited to. In order to do that, we need to do one thing: affirm.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Dammalapati.
Hi, Senator. So you talk about more power and control, but the UN treaty requires the United States to share information and technology with other countries, and also other nations would have full jurisdiction of all coastal waters up to 10 to 12 miles from the United States shores. So doesn't all of this just prove that the United States will only have less power and less restricted and
No, as I mentioned in my speech, an expert that already deals with this already said that we follow a lot of the regulations mentioned in UNCLOS, and if we don't join this resolution, we're just allowing Russia and China to freely abuse our national sovereignty.
Well, as of right now, we are not. Parsotan.
Hi. So how exactly does power increase from Russia and China when we fail the bill?
If we fail the bill, then China and Russia can, I don't know, have more power over EEZs, I guess.
But how does that happen, right? Because power doesn't artificially grow just and come out of nowhere. That's not how it happens.
Yeah,
right?
I'm guessing that when we would argue over disputes, that they would have more of a leverage because they have more credibility because they're part of the convention, right?
Thank you. The questioning period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
I thank the chair.
Seeing as that was the speech in the affirmation, all negative speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator Bole.
I thank the chair. That is Senator Bole, spelled B-O-L-E. I'll be speaking for the second and presumably last time this legislative session. I'm independent. I'm not with the school. So can any of my judges just give me a sign if you're not ready for me to begin? And I'll be happy to. Awesome. Ever since I was a kid, I always loved the game Battleship, where players would seek to destroy each other's ships on a game board. But let's use the same rules in the game Battleship in today's debate, where we find that at the end of the day, the negation's battleships are the only ones left standing. So first, F1 hit. Senator McAuliffe, in your first sponsorship speech, you tell us that we're going to be using whatever military means possible in order to secure our claims, which is really, really risky, and here's why. The Foreign Policy Journal in 2018 tells us that Russia is really, really totalitarian and territorial when it comes to their sea claims. Your resolve clause that is championed by you states that we're going to be going into whatever military means necessary to secure our claims, which is a bad thing. Next, F2 hit. Mr. Siva, in your second affirmation speech, you state that Russia's being really, really aggressive, so we should too, which I generally would argue with you as that is a bad thing. You state that Russia and China are both encroaching on our claims, which I agree with you. But understand that the only way to actually stop that is by passing coalitions and diplomatic ventures with other countries, not today's legislation. Next, F3 hit. Senator Rubas, you mentioned that there's going to be a direct environmental impact to passing today's legislation. But I ask you one thing. Is throwing away our geopolitical stance actually worth it if we're able to pass future legislation that we're already able to pass regarding the environment? Clearly, no. Next, Mr. Dileepkumar, the F4 hit. We're going to be passing an enforcement mechanism, you state, that is going to be super dangerous, as I state, because we're going to be denying China and Russia's claims without actually everyone being involved in it. Next, you order everyone else on the negation to make a claim that you've never heard before, and that's going to outweigh all of the impacts of the affirmation. And I have that today. F5 hit, our final hit. Something that literally no one has brought up in today's debate that will single-handedly change the way that you're going to be viewing today. Article 82 of UNCLOS allows royalties to be redistributed to corrupt nations and state sponsors of terrorism. The Heritage Foundation found that royalties can be diverted to countries that literally fund terrorists. So Ms. Gao, when you mentioned that we're currently already following most of the rules of UNCLOS, I would generally agree with you. But notice that the only impact that you're actually going to be taking today, because what you're stating is that we're already basically doing UNCLOS, we're not doing this. Well, let's take your argument at the highest ground, right? What's going to be happening is we're indirectly funding terrorists. You failed today because you don't send money to terrorists. You keep it in the pockets of our Americans. When it comes down to this critical game of Battleship, we realize that at the end of the day, The affirmation has fundamentally sunk the battleships. The negation has fundamentally sunk the battleships of the affirmation. Negate.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 59 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Gao.
So when was UNCLOS funded exactly? Or like when did it start?
I'm not totally sure, you tell me.
Yeah, 1982, right? So it's already been in action for a while.
Exactly.
So
and it hasn't worked.
On top of it, it's already an international organization. So why
Okay.
isn't it effective when dealing with terrorists, as you mentioned?
Because it literally, Article 82 of it sends royalties to countries that don't have deep sea claims, therefore funding terrorist countries, such as Sudan, for example.
But didn't I say in my speech that we literally follow all of the regulations
yeah, exactly.
of
We don't follow that, though. When you pass, you indirectly fund terrorists, which I would argue
But that's just one point.
High Representative, in the status quo, aren't we seeing increased Russian aggression related to the Arctic region anyway?
Yes.
So isn't passing today's legislation protecting our own borders and
right now we're not actually that present in the Arctic. If we're able to pass
legislation, aren't we?
But you're not doing that when you pass. You literally indirectly fund terrorists.
We know
which
that
is
Russia
that a bad thing? It's
but
probably
we know Russia's taking advantage of our region. So if you pass this legislation,
No, because that's not the only impact when you pass. I'm telling you that there are direct negative impacts. We can pass future legislation that solves that problem really
Thank you.
easily.
The questioning period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
I think
So
the
that was a speech in the negation. All affirmative speakers, please rise. That will go to Senator Pasquerella unopposed.
Hi, that's Senator Pasquerella speaking for the second time this legislative session. Again, I'm from Loyola School, and I'm ready whenever you guys are.
Just give me 1 second to finish up the previous speaker's ballot. Thank you. Okay, I'm ready on my side. Thank you so much.
Just very quickly, I'm sorry, before I interrupt you, I'm very sorry. That was a ding. I don't know who it was, but even though this is an online tournament, just keep in mind that communication outside the chamber isn't allowed. Okay, so I'll let that go. I'm not going to make it a big deal, but please don't let it happen again. I know it's an online tournament, but please don't communicate outside the chamber.
Thanks.
Sorry.
So everyone's ready, right? Just to check. The U.S. seems to takes pride in standing alone, swimming against the current in geopolitics. But in our refusal to repeatedly ratify the UNCLOS agreement, we have stood alone against the current of geopolitical change and progress. Let's look to the two main arguments that were made in this round to understand why we affirm. Those arguments are essentially all going to boil down into two categories of sovereignty and the environmental impact. First, let's understand how this legislation impacts the United States sovereignty. It all has to do with the UN dynamics, because as one of the largest financial contributors to the UN and a holder of a lot of influence in the UN, what this means is that when we join the UNCLOS agreement, whenever there is some sort of situation where there's a dispute over an EEZ, the UN is more likely to side with our nation rather than those other countries. And so when Senator Nalluri and Dammalapati tell us that UNCLOS hinders our national sovereignty by forcing cooperation with other nations, look to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in 2020 that tells us that under UNCLOS, protections are in place to guarantee that there are no sovereignty concerns, that we get sovereign rights over our seabeds and natural resources. We have sovereignty in our surrounding waters and around the world, because Senator McAuliffe showed us that under UNCLOS, we're going to have greater guarantees that we have a stake in the Strait of Hormuz. And Senator Siva told us that Russia is encroaching on our EEZs in the Arctic, while Senator Bole tries to tell us that this is only going to push us to more conflict with Russia. But look to Fiona McDonald, a journalist for the New York Times in August of 2016, that told us that the 5 nations that stake claims to the Arctic seas, of those that have ratified UNCLOS, they are much more likely to have preference in terms of sovereignty when there is a conflict that the UN has to resolve. And so when Senator Dileepkumar tells us that we're guaranteeing our protection of the economic exclusion zones, understand that he is absolutely right. The UN is much more likely to favor the United States in any geopolitical conflict when we have ratified this treaty. But next, let's move to the environmental impact, because Senator Bole tells us just a few minutes ago that he doesn't want to throw away geopolitics for environmental regulation, but understand that the US has passed a shockingly low number of environmental regulations. So we most definitely need the UN to supervise us and to make sure that we make progress. But next, Senator Rao tells us that we're having an oil rush in the Arctic under this legislation. But you told us in your speech that major corporations like Shell and Exxon are already looking into the Arctic for that oil rush. Nothing changes in this legislation. And then with deep sea mining, Senators Nalluri and Kumar tell us that we're only placing a greater economic burden because of lawsuits and the ISA fees. But look to a Yale University study in April of 2019 that tells us that the United States will have to cost hundreds of billions of dollars as soon as climate change takes its full economic impact. Understand the largest impacts of today's debate boil down to having a better environment and fixing our geopolitical strains. That's why we affirm.
Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator Kumar.
Okay, so if I state in my speech that America's environment has gotten much cleaner, why do we need to uphold ISA regulation?
Okay, so the thing is that deep sea mining in itself, no matter how much regulation you put on it, is going to be bad for the environment.
I'm talking about the environment.
Sure, the regulation for deep sea mining, correct?
Sure.
Wait, I'm sorry, what regulation are you talking about? Deep sea mining or other?
Okay, I'm talking about climate change regulations.
Okay, which specific ones? Under UN clause or the current ones we have with the government?
I'm talking about ISA climate change regulations.
Those have to do with deep sea mining.
Thank you. Senator Nalluri.
Hi, so why does the United States currently not ratify UNCLOS?
Because we see it as something that's going to threaten our sovereignty, just like you told us in your speech.
Exactly. In part 11 of the UNCLOS agreement, basically what it does is it takes all of the minerals that are obtained in the economic exclusion zones and it distributes them equally. So what this means is that the United States won't be getting all of its minerals. So how?
Look, I understand the concern that comes from that, but deep sea mining is still negative for our environment as a whole.
Yes, but at the same time, it's still depleting our resources. If the minerals
Thank you. The questioning period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was the speech in the affirmation, all negative speakers, please rise. That goes to Senator Perez unopposed.
Thank you, the chair. I am Senator Perez, speaking for the second time this session. Please give me a sign signal or a nod whenever you're ready. The UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is a cornerstone of international peace and security. It provides a neutral mechanism to allocate the world's maritime resources. But in the South China Sea, China is deploying military might to overturn the legal rights given to other countries. In July 2016, the tribunal established under UNCLOS ruled that China's claim to territory in the South China Sea were invalid. China's response at the time was to dismiss the ruling as nothing more than a piece of waste paper. In the years since, China's behavior has not fundamentally changed in the region. If countries can treat international treaties as waste, then no agreement is safe. International order begins to break down. Sponsors of this bill have argued that ratification will bolster the credibility and stability of the international order, and ultimately U.S. interests at home and abroad. But ratification in the face of China's intransigence will do just the opposite of what this bill hopes. Ratification will undermine its credibility and make the world less safe. Negate this legislation for oil hegemony and terrorism. Will Rogers at the Center for New American Security explains in 2012 that without joining UNCLOS, U.S. companies won't risk drilling in the oil Arctic because they won't have legal precaution, like Senator Dammalapati points out. The impact is that of Senator Rao's global warming. Corey Morningstar at Hunting News explains in 2011 that significant increases in undersea drilling will result in huge amounts of burned methane escaping. And because methane is 62 times more potent than CO2, it would be the equivalent of an immediate 3 degrees Fahrenheit temperature increase that would rapidly melt the polar ice caps. This would in turn cause a 30-degree global temperature increase. When it comes to hegemony, the impact is war. brought by Senators Dammalapati, Bole, and Kumar, despite with what Senators Gowan and Pasquerella have said. Former UN Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad outlines in 2011 that if the U.S. loses hegemony, it increases the likelihood of great power war because enemies see an opportunity to take advantage of weakness, while allies take up their own arms out of fear, starting arms races that increase the chance of all-out conflict. In intelligence, Robert Ackerman of the AFCEA explained in 2019 that as part of the war on terrorism, naval intelligence has been reprioritized to counter terrorist threats. The impact is devastating terrorism. The U.S. is particularly vulnerable to terrorist infiltration of nuclear and biological materials that may be hidden in ships' cargoes, and uncovered documents have shown that Al-Qaeda has made numerous plans to smuggle nuclear material to the U.S. Ratifying does not add credibility to UNCLOS, as Senator Kumar has said. We would be letting the environment worsen. You would let the U.S. lose hegemony. And most importantly, you would let terrorism happen. Negate this legislation because affirming would cause more problems and let more conflicts continue. Affirm this legislation because at the end of the day, this is what we stand for.
Thank you for that speech time of 2 minutes and 53 seconds. All questioners, please rise. From those standing, that will go to Senator McAuliffe.
Okay, so what impact does this legislation have on companies?
Companies-wise, first of all, there is no legal representation if they want to drill mines in the sea or in the Arctic, meaning they won't go out there and ultimately decreasing the GDP per capita of the US because no one wants to be there. So it's pretty simple.
Okay, but if we're already drilling in the Arctic, what does this legislation do that would change that?
But we're not drilling in the Arctic. No one wants to go there. There is no legal representation. If
Thank
anything
you, Senator Parsotan.
What happens to our current position in the geopolitical scheme when we pass this bill?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
What happens to our position in the geopolitical world when we pass this bill or fail this bill?
We lose a great amount of it, as many representatives, many senators have said before.
Behind that?
We lose a great amount of hegemony, meaning that we would lose power and let Russia and different countries have their way with international trade and their position in the sea.
What specific?
Thank you. The questioning time has elapsed. The speaker may now be seated. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Parsotan, the floor is yours.
I thank the chair. For the judges, competitors, Ms. President, and Mr. Parliamentarian, again, that's VJ Parsotan, spelled Parsotan. Speaking for the second time this session, just any indication when you're ready is great. Thank you.
What's your school affiliation?
It's the Saraswati School of Science.
So independent.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, is everyone ready? Thank you. Ms. President, could you let me know if everyone's ready? Again, I can't see everyone. So, okay, great. Let's bring up my timer here. Okay, perfect. It's a common tenement in the Hindu religion that you live your life by letters B, C, and D. B for birth, C for change, and D for death. But when we look at the narratives that are proposed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, all we see is that we can create birth to new change and not death to our oceans. It's because I believe that by ratifying the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, that we can create some eternal benefit that I ask you to stand with me and pass. But don't believe the partisan pundits, but let's look at the first issue that's been brought up throughout today's debate, which is the environmental impacts. First championed with the issues with the ISA, the International Seabed Authority. Ms. Nalluri told you that the legal framework around the deep sea mining relinquishes the power to the ISA and allows them to control the sale of minerals. But then Mr. Rubas tries to make a non-response to that by saying that the ISA just simply says, oh, you have to get a contract before you can deep sea mine, and then simply say, oh, this protects the environment because they have to verify what countries have to mine first. But here's how this materializes. Mr. Bole tries to refute this by saying that, oh, when we actually join UNCLOS, we're just going to participate in the abuses of sending it to these 13 of the most 20 dangerous terrorist-ridden countries and tell them, oh, here's your money, you can do terrorism. However, what this legislation allows us to do is to actually provide veto power for us to stop that from happening. Senior research fellow Stephen Groves at the Heritage Foundation in 2019 corroborates that basically when the United States joins the UNCLOS agreement, they're able to veto any sort of sending to a terrorist-ridden country or the most corrupt nations, therefore meaning that the ISA and mining with deep-sea mining through the ISA is inherently a good thing. So turn Mr. Bole's impact against him. But I want to provide one more impact that's so beneficial to this debate, which is how we were to help the marine environment. David Schiffman of the University of Miami in May of 2013 finds that an international solution is needed to combat cruise ship pollution and the dumping of waste by cruise ships because it's harmful to animals and humans. These agreements include one like this under today's decision. That's why we went on environmental impacts in the affirmation. But next, talk about the international position that's been largely contested by every single representative and senator on both sides. We first see that we talk about the influence in the South China Sea, Ms. McAuliffe's concerns of closing the Strait of Hormuz, and the Arctic, like Mr. Siva says. Everyone has already proved that we increase power in the regions of these all three because of passing and gaining and being a part of UNCLOS. However, if we're preventing closing the Strait of Hormuz, like Ms. Olive says, and risk not losing 30% of our oil supply, here's why that's a good thing. Amy Mafford-Jaffe, the Columbia University of Journal International Affairs in 2019, an analyst finds that data suggests that military conflicts over oil result in significant disruptions in oil capacity in the medium term and beyond, driving prices higher for some period until markets can adjust. But the New York Times and Nelson D. Shorts, a publisher, furthers in April of 2020 why that's so bad. Because oil barrel prices would raise by $3 a barrel, and it would raise gas prices on average by 20%. So, Ms. Rao, climate change increases don't have our people here to live them out. And at the end of the day, you have to pass legislation, not only because we mean our international hegemony that everyone wants, but we see environmental impacts. Pass.
Thank you. The speaking time is concluded. Thank you for that speech time of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please rise. Senator Nalluri.
Hi, Senator. So I'm confused by your first point. Are you saying that the U.S. is just considered an exception to this agreement and it has the power to veto anything when it comes to mineral distribution?
See, that's not how the agreement actually works. The way that the agreement works is that Article 82 says that any country who joins it has this new jurisdiction with the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, and they're able to veto these plans to send it to any country because of the fact that it may be inciting corruption or inciting terrorism. When the United States join, we gain more leverage on the international community and gain that hegemony that everyone wants.
Thank you. Senator Pasquerella.
Hi, so let's talk a little bit about the South China Sea. So when the United States gets into conflict with China over some easy, is the UN more likely to favor China because they've ratified UNCLOS, or will they favor us?
Okay, well, that argument becomes moot at the end of the day when we pass legislation because one, both countries will now have passed UNCLOS, and simply for the fact that they both passed UNCLOS, we're going to be seeing a more even footing in the UN General Council.
As of now, without the ratification of UNCLOS, do you think that puts us at a disadvantage in that kind of situation?
Okay, not necessarily, because what you're predicating this argument on is just
question period is elapsed. The speaker may now be seated.
I thank the chair.
Senator Siva, do you have a motion?
I move to previous question.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, we will now be moving to voting procedure. All those in favor of passing today's legislation, put up your placard and put it down when I call your name. Senator Dileepkumar, Senator Siva, Senator Rubas, Senator McAuliffe, Senator Pasquerella, Senator Parsotan, and Senator Gao. Senator McAuliffe, I believe I called your name. All those in negation, please raise your placards. Senator Kumar, Senator Nalluri, Senator Perez, Senator Dammalapati, and Senator Rao. Any and all abstentions, there should be one. Senator Bole. On a vote of 7 to 5 to 1, this bill does pass. My congrats to the sponsor. Senator Dileepkumar, do you have a motion?
Yeah, I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, so ordered. I'm going to now turn it over to the parliamentarian.
Thank you. For all my competitors, please stay in the chamber because we have to do voting for outstanding legislature. For the judges, once you've put in your ranks, you are free to go. Most of our judges here have done very well at outrounds at national tournaments. Their feedback is invaluable, and I hope that you guys will be able to use it whenever the pandemic ends and we get back to real tournaments. That being said, are there any motions to open the floor for outstanding senator nominations? Senator Parsotan.
I move to open the floor for outstanding senator nominations.
Is there a second? Assuming unanimous consent, so ordered. Are there any motions on the floor? Senator Rubas.
Motion to nominate Senator Dileepkumar.
Do you accept?
I respectfully accept.
Senator Siva.
I nominate Senator Dammalapati.
Do you accept?
I humbly accept.
Senator Parsotan.
I nominate Senator Bole.
Do you accept?
I do accept.
Any
Yes,
other
I do.
nominations?
Thank you.
Senator Siva again.
I move to close the floor for outstanding speaker nominations.
Objection. I move
Senator-
to nominate the Honorable Manohar for Best Legislator.
Mr. Manohar, could you kindly mute Mr. Murgida? Are there any objections to closing the floor?
What has he said?
Just mute him. Are there any objections? Seeing none, we're going to move into the voting procedure. Allow me to make the straw poll, and I will put it in the chat. Once again, the results of this poll are supposed to be secret, but I know everyone can see it by simply hitting the results button. So just don't make it too obvious that you know who won. Thank you. And thanks again for a great session. Make sure to stay safe. Don't catch the coronavirus, I guess. Don't die if you already have it.
So while you all are voting, I'd love for all of you to also fill out a feedback form I've attached into the Google Meets chat. It's just supposed to give the directors and the judges a little bit of feedback of how you thought this all went. And then I'm also here to announce prizes because we finally figured out what we're going to do. So we got a sponsorship with Demos, which is a sort of online platform that's kind of like a mix of like Twitter and Reddit for debate. And you can find more information about that in announcements. So what we have decided on is the top 3 places are going to get gavels. The top 3 places are also going to get NSDA pens. And I have one right here for all of you to see. And then all of you, since you all are finalists, you're going to get a custom-made sticker made by Mr. Reaser that looks fantastic. So congratulations. So as you know, due to like current situations, shipping is going to take a while. So please bear with us as all non-essential items are on hold. So we'll let you know as soon as possible once we're able to actually ship these out. So we're going to stay in contact with all of you and congratulations. So thank you so much for registering.
And let me just add, if you're a non-graduating TJ student, I'm going to be handling distribution for that. Anyway.
So when are awards going to be?
We're doing awards as soon as possible. We've decided just to keep you in the call, and you can leave the room or anything, but we're gonna just not wait until 5:45 like planned.
If judges are fast, it'll be like within 10 minutes, hopefully, right?
Yeah, we're gonna have judges fill out their own rankings too, so that will help.
And then how can we get ballots to us?
I'm gonna email you ballots on the registration sheet. I'm gonna make that open again so you can all put your emails in again if you didn't already have it. And I'll email your ballots either very, very late today or throughout all of Sunday.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it was an honor competing with y'all, and thank you to the judges, Parliamentarian, POs, and Josie for like running the tournament.
Jason's like, hi, I exist.
Well, I see. The thing is, I don't.
Can we get a round of applause? Sorry. Yeah, can we get a round of applause for the tournament directors and everybody who judged or parlayed?
Yes.